Welcome, welcome. You're here at Harryverse X. Today we present to you, Athena and Poseidon found Harry in cupboard and raised the immortal god of wisdom and ocean. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Cosmos. The night smelled like rain that hadn't decided to fall yet. Athena noticed it first, that particular pressure in the air over Surrey, England, that peculiar atmospheric indecision that mortals called overcast and she called waiting. She had been waiting too, though she couldn't have said for what. She'd been standing on the roof of a building in Athens, watching the lights of the modern city bleed orange into the low clouds, when something pulled at her attention like a string tied around her sternum. Not a prayer. Not a sacrifice. Something older than both of those things. Something that had no name in any language currently spoken by living mouths. She followed it without thinking, because that was what Athena did. She followed the thing that didn't have a name yet. Poseidon found her standing on a perfectly ordinary street in a perfectly ordinary English suburb, staring at a perfectly ordinary house with her head tilted at an angle that would have made any of her priests deeply nervous. "You felt it too," he said. It wasn't a question. "Since when do you follow me anywhere?" she said, without looking at him. "I wasn't following you. I was following that." He jerked his chin toward the house. Number 4, Privet Drive. Neat hedges, painted shutters, a welcome mat that said "Home Sweet Home" in cheerful yellow letters that Athena found personally offensive. "I was in the Aegean when it hit me. Nearly capsized a fishing vessel. Felt like someone struck a bell the size of a mountain. It's coming from inside. I know where it's coming from." Poseidon crossed his arms and looked at the house with the expression he usually reserved for things that were about to experience a tsunami. "Question is what it is." Athena was already walking toward the front door. The street was empty. It was past midnight, she could tell by the quality of the silence, that particular depth of quiet that only settled over residential streets in the small hours, when even the insomniac dogwalkers had given up and gone to bed. A few houses down, a cat was sitting on a garden wall watching them with the specific brand of feline contempt that suggested it had seen gods before and remained unimpressed. Athena walked past it. Poseidon paused to look at the cat. The cat looked back. "Don't," Athena said. "I wasn't going to do anything. You were going to talk to it. Cats are good listeners." She pushed open the gate to number 4 without touching it, the latch clicking back silently, and walked up the front path. The pull was stronger now. It was coming from somewhere low, ground level, or below, and it had a character to it that she was still trying to classify. Power, obviously. Enormous, dense, ancient power of the kind that had no business being in a suburban house in Surrey. But underneath the power there was something else. Something small. Something that was, she realized with a start, sleeping. Whatever was generating that signal was asleep. "There's a child in there," she said. Poseidon came up beside her. He felt it too now, that closer and more specific sense of the thing they'd been tracking. His face changed, subtly, because he was a god and gods didn't do anything dramatically unless they meant to, but she'd known him for several thousand years and she could read the change. The slight softening around his eyes. The way his jaw unclenched. "Yeah," he said quietly. "There is." The front door was locked. The deadbolt, the chain, and what appeared to be an additional padlock installed by someone with significant trust issues. Athena looked at this security arrangement for approximately half a second and then it was all unlocked, the door swinging inward on silent hinges. The house breathed out at them, cooking smells, fabric softener, the ghost of a television evening, and underneath all of it, underneath everything domestic and ordinary, that deep resonant bell tone that had pulled them both across countries. They stepped inside. The hallway was narrow, decorated with the particular aggressive normality of people who had decided that normal was the most important thing in the world to be. Family photographs in matching frames. A coat rack overloaded with sensible coats. Umbrella stand. Everything was beige or off-white, everything was neat, everything looked like it had been specifically chosen to announce that nothing unusual had ever happened here and nothing unusual ever would. Poseidon looked at a framed photograph of a large blonde man standing beside an equally large blonde woman and a baby roughly the size and shape of a watermelon. He looked at it for a long moment. "These people," he said, with the measured tone of someone suppressing a significant opinion, "are very committed to beige." "Quiet," Athena said, but without heat. She was listening. She moved deeper into the hallway, past the staircase, and stopped. There was a door under the stairs. Small, almost invisible, built flush into the paneling beneath the risers, with a bolt on the outside that looked newly installed. A single bolt on the outside of a door that was barely large enough to admit a medium-sized dog. Athena looked at this door for a long time. Then she looked at the bolt. Then she looked at the bolt again. The signal was coming from behind this door. Poseidon leaned past her shoulder and looked at the bolt. The silence stretched out for 3 full seconds before he said, very quietly, "That bolt is on the outside." "Yes." "Someone locked this door from the outside." "Yes." "There's a child in there." "Yes, Poseidon. I am aware." He reached past her and slid the bolt back. The sound it made was very small. He pushed the door open, and it swung inward on a space that was, as far as Athena could determine, roughly the dimensions of a generous coffin. There were pipes running along the low ceiling. A single dead spider plant on a shelf that existed for no clear purpose. A thin blanket. A pillow that had seen better decades. And in the middle of all of it, tucked against the back wall with his knees drawn up and one small fist curled under his chin, was an infant. He was perhaps 16 months old, give or take. Dark hair, wild and pointing in several different directions with the aggressive independence of hair that had never once obeyed a comb. He was wearing a onesie with ducks on it. He had a scar on his forehead, fresh, still pink, shaped like a lightning bolt, that Athena recognized immediately as a magical wound, a curse scar, the kind that left fingerprints on the soul as much as the skin. He was, without any question whatsoever, the source of the signal. Athena crouched down. The space was so small she had to angle herself sideways, one hand braced on the door frame, and she looked at this sleeping child with the same careful, thorough attention she gave to everything, to battle plans, to philosophical arguments, to the stars. She looked at him like he was a problem she needed to solve, and then something shifted in her assessment as she looked longer, and she started looking at him like he was something else. Something she didn't have a category for yet. The power coming off him was, she tried several different frameworks and discarded all of them. It wasn't like a wizard's magic, which was a skill, a practiced learned fluency with the fabric of reality. It wasn't like a demigod's power, that particular half-mortal sizzle she knew intimately from millennia of watching her own children navigate the world. It was deeper than both of those things. It was structural. Like looking at a building and realizing that what you thought were decorative columns were actually load-bearing, that the whole thing only stood because of this one thing, this child, this sleeping boy with duck pajamas and terrible hair. The killing curse had hit him. She could see the shape of it in the energy around him, the scar tissue of a death magic impact, and instead of extinguishing the light she was looking at, the curse had cracked something. Broken something open the way a fault line breaks open in an earthquake, releasing something that had been sealed away under pressure for a very long time. She had seen something like this before. Once. In an age so old that even she only remembered it in fragments. The age before Olympus. Before the Titans. The age of before. "Poseidon," she said. He was already looking over her shoulder. He'd gone very still, which was notable for a god whose natural state was kinetic, restless, moving the way water always moved. He was still now, and looking at this child with an expression she hadn't seen on his face she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen that expression. Something between recognition and awe. "Tell me you see it too," she said. "I see it." His voice was rough. "That's, Athena, what is that? I don't know yet. She reached out, very slowly, and laid 2 fingers gently against the child's forehead, just beside the scar. She closed her eyes. The world went very bright. She saw, not visions, not prophecy, not any of the neat narrative forms that oracles use to make divine knowledge digestible for human minds. She saw something rawer than that. She saw this child before birth, before conception, before the lineage that produced him stretched all the way back to when magic was new in the world, and she saw a spark. Old. So old. Something that had been sleeping in bloodlines for generations upon generations, diluting and diminishing and almost gone, the last echo of an age when the boundary between mortal and divine was not a wall but a conversation. The killing curse had hit that spark. The killing curse, designed to extinguish, to end, to unmake, had instead struck something that did not understand the concept of being unmade, and the impact had been like striking flint against steel in a room full of dry wood. The spark was awake. And it was enormous. She pulled her fingers back and opened her eyes. His name, she said, and she had to take a deliberate breath, which was unusual for someone who didn't technically need to breathe, is Harry Potter. His parents were killed tonight by a dark wizard. Someone left him here. On a doorstep. She paused. In a cupboard. Who left him in a cupboard? She had seen that too. The old wizard, white-haired, twinkling, moving with the certainty of a man executing a plan he'd been building for years. She had seen the calculations in it, the blood ward, the protection, the shape of a strategy that required this child to grow up small and scared and grateful. She understood the magic of it. She did not like it. Someone who made a decision about this child before asking the child, she said. Someone who looked at this power, she gestured at the boy, at the radiant, sleeping, enormous thing that was Harry Potter, and thought, this is useful. Poseidon looked at her. Then he looked at the child. Then he said, simply, we're taking him. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really a decision. It was the kind of statement that arrives fully formed, inevitable, the way the sea arriving at the shore is not a decision the sea makes but simply what the sea does. Athena looked at the bolt on the outside of the door one more time. Yes, she said. We are. Poseidon reached into the cupboard and gathered the child with a careful competence that surprised Athena, and then she remembered that he had children. Several of them, mortal and divine alike. He knew how to hold a baby. He cradled Harry against his chest with one broad hand supporting the boy's head, the other under his back, and Harry stirred, his face scrunching into the expression all infants made in those half-awake moments before they decided whether to continue sleeping or to announce their displeasure to the universe at volume. Shoo, Poseidon said, very low, and something in his voice carried the sound the ocean made at 3 a.m, that deep, rhythmic, ancient patience. The child stilled. His breathing steadied. The small fist uncurled slightly. Athena watched this and felt something she didn't immediately catalogue, some new calculation entering her understanding of how this night was going to matter. We should go, she said. Before the household wakes. What about the blood wards the old wizard set? She had already thought about this. The blood ward was anchored to the mother's sacrifice and the blood relation of the people in this house. It was clever magic, genuinely elegant in a narrow, mechanical way, but it had a significant structural flaw. It was built for a wizard child. It was not built for what Harry Potter was becoming. The divine spark that was now fully awake in him was already, she could see it, consuming the blood ward's anchor points the way a fire consumed paper. By morning, there would be nothing left of Dumbledore's carefully constructed protection except ash. The ward is already dissolving, she said. He's outgrowing it. Poseidon looked down at the child in his arms. Harry's eyes were open now, green eyes, so startlingly, vividly green that even in the dark hallway they seemed to generate their own light, which Athena suspected was not entirely metaphorical. He was looking up at Poseidon with the specific, serious, unfrightened intensity that very young children had before the world taught them to be cautious about strangers, and Poseidon was looking back at him, and then Harry reached up one small hand and grabbed Poseidon's beard. Poseidon winced. Athena said nothing. She would not give him the satisfaction of watching her find this funny. "You can let go now," Poseidon told the child, with dignity. Harry, in the time-honored tradition of infants everywhere, did not let go. He appeared to find the beard fascinating, which Athena would have to remember as leverage at some future point. They left the house the way they'd entered, quietly, the door pulling shut behind them, the locks resetting, the street as empty as it had been. The cat on the wall watched them go. Athena paused, looked at the cat, and received in return a gaze of absolute inscrutability. "Don't say anything," she said. "I wasn't going to say anything," Poseidon said, behind her. "I was talking to the cat." She walked down the front path. Behind her, Poseidon followed with the child, and she heard Harry make a sound, a small, soft, wondering sound, like someone discovering something extraordinary, and she looked back and saw that Harry was staring up at the sky with those luminous green eyes, where the clouds had broken in one place to show a handful of stars. The look on the boy's face stopped her cold. It was recognition. Not the recognition of a child who had been shown this before and remembered it, the recognition of something waking up, something older than the child's 16-month-old brain, something that had always known the stars and was simply glad to see them again. She looked at that tiny face tilted up toward the sky with an expression of such complete, unguarded joy that something moved in her chest, some mechanism that she'd always known was there but that rarely had occasion to operate. She was Athena. She had been born from her father's skull in full armor, ready for war. She had not been an infant. She had not had the experience of opening her eyes in a dark place and finding stars. "All right," she said, quietly, to no one in particular. Then she walked to Poseidon's side, and the three of them stood on that empty suburban street for a moment, looking up through the break in the clouds. Then Athena said, "I know what he is." Poseidon looked at her. The child was still staring at the stars with that look of private recognition. "He has a divine spark," she said. "Ancient. Pre-Olympian. Primordial." She paused, working through it, feeling the argument click into place piece by piece the way a well-built machine assembled itself. The killing curse hit it and woke it up. He was always going to wake up eventually, over generations, but the curse accelerated it catastrophically. He's not a wizard who survived a curse. He's something that was sleeping in a wizard's bloodline, and the curse rang the bell and now it's awake. She looked at Harry. He needs to be trained. Not in magic, in what he is. If he goes back into that world without understanding himself, without knowing what he carries, he'll be managed. Used. He'll be another piece in someone else's strategy. Poseidon's expression made it clear he had thoughts about people who design strategies around children. "He's ours to raise," he said. Not possessively, she knew the difference in his voice between possessive and protective, and this was protective, clear and certain as the tide. "Until he knows himself. Until he's ready. That could take years." "Good. I have time." He looked down at Harry, who had transferred his attention from the stars to Poseidon's face, studying it with the same absorbed concentration. "Hello," Poseidon said to the child, quite naturally. Harry said something that wasn't yet a word but had the emphatic quality of one. "He agrees," Poseidon said. "You don't know that. I'm the god of the sea. I can read currents." He met Athena's eyes over the boy's head. "We take him to the coast first. To the water. If he's what you think he is, it'll respond to him." This was, Athena acknowledged to herself, not a bad way to test the hypothesis. She'd been planning to approach it theoretically, texts, observation, careful measurement. Poseidon, characteristically, wanted to throw the child at the ocean and see what happened. These two approaches between them had generally produced good results over the centuries, which was the main reason she tolerated his company. "Don't actually throw him at the ocean," she said. "I know how to handle a child, Athena. I'm simply establishing parameters." Noted. Your parameters are noted. He shifted Harry higher against his chest, and Harry grabbed the collar of his coat instead of the beard, which seemed to be considered an acceptable compromise by both parties. Come on then. The Atlantic's closest. They left Privet Drive at midnight, the two oldest active gods of Olympus and the child between them, and behind them number 4 went dark and unknowing, and the home sweet home Matt lay on the threshold of a house that had nearly become a very different kind of story. The drive to the Welsh coast took no time at all, because gods don't travel the way mortals travel. One moment they were in Surrey, and the next they were standing on a cliff above a beach where the Atlantic moved in the dark below them, big and breathing and black. The wind came off the water hard, carrying salt and cold, the particular clean violence of ocean air that tasted like the edge of the world. Harry was awake. Properly awake now, alert in the way infants became at new stimulus, his head turning, his nostrils flaring slightly at the smell of the sea. Poseidon carried him to the edge of the cliff path, where stone steps cut into the rock face led down to the beach, and he looked down at the water, and the water moved. Not the ambient movement of tide and current. Something more specific. Something that started at the waterline directly below them and spread outward in a pattern like rings from a stone dropped in still water, except instead of rippling away it rippled toward the cliff, toward the steps, toward the child standing 60 feet above the surface looking down with those green eyes gone very wide and very bright. Poseidon said. He couldn't quite keep the pleasure out of it. That's not you. Athena said, watching the water. I am not currently doing that, he said. That is entirely the boy. The water reached the base of the cliff and stopped there, holding, the waves breaking in a rhythm that was slightly different from the waves on either side, shorter interval, more deliberate, like a pulse. Like a heartbeat. Like his heartbeat. Harry made the sound again, that emphatic almost word, and reached down toward the water with both hands, fingers spread, with the absolute confidence of someone who had never once been given reason to doubt that what they reached for would come to them. Poseidon took 3 steps down the cliff path and then crouched, and Harry's outstretched hands came close enough to the air above the water that he was almost touching it. The wave at the base of the cliff rose. It rose 6 feet above the normal waterline. It rose until the foam at its crest was nearly level with Harry's reaching hands, and Harry laughed, a baby's laugh, unrestrained and full and lighting up the whole dark cliff face with something that wasn't quite light but felt like it, and the wave broke against the rock in a spray of white water that caught them both, Poseidon and Harry, drenching them completely. Poseidon sat back on the cliff steps, soaking wet, with a soaking wet infant in his arms who was laughing at the indignity of it with total, wholehearted delight. He looked up at Athena, who was standing 3 steps above him, entirely dry, watching. You stepped back, he said. I moved to higher ground, she said. Tactical positioning. You knew the wave was going to break on us. I assessed the probable trajectory of the wave, yes. And you said nothing. I wanted to see what he would do. She looked at Harry, who was still laughing, patting Poseidon's soaked coat with both hands as if confirming the dampness was real. Now I know. Poseidon looked down at the child in his arms, wet, laughing, more awake and alive than anything had any right to be at this hour on this cold cliff above the Atlantic, with a war scar on his forehead and the ocean answering to him like a dog called home. He felt something he recognized from a very long time ago, from before the wars, from before the divisions, from a time when the world was new and he had looked at it with the same uncalculated joy this child was currently directing at everything in reach. He felt, for possibly the first time in a very long time, genuinely hopeful. What are we going to call him? He asked. His name is Harry Potter. That's his given name. I mean, he shifted Harry, looking at him. Harry looked back, still glowing with aftermath laughter. He's going to need to know who he is. All of who he is. Athena was quiet for a moment. She came down the steps and crouched beside Poseidon on the narrow path, and she looked at this child who had called the sea from 60 feet above it and laughed when it answered. She thought about the name she'd seen attached to him in the magic of bloodlines, in the ancient pre-Olympian records she had access to that most of her family didn't know existed. Hadrian, she said. That's close enough to Harry that he'll recognize it when he's older. And, she paused, considering, feeling the rightness of it settle, Thalassios. Of the sea. You're giving him the sea. He already has the sea. I'm just acknowledging it. She reached out and touched the child's dark hair lightly, not quite a gesture of affection, or not quite only a gesture of affection. Something more deliberate than that. Something like a claim and a promise at the same moment. He'll carry both. Wisdom and ocean. Strategy and depth. He'll need both, for what's coming. What do you think is coming? She watched Harry, who had calmed from his laughter and was now leaning against Poseidon's chest with his eyes at half-mast, clearly approaching the specific, boneless unconsciousness of an infant who has had a sufficiently stimulating evening. The scar on his forehead was faint in the dark, but she could see it, and she could see what it represented, not just the magic of the curse, but the record of a war, a conflict with a being who had made himself an enemy of death itself, who was still out there in pieces, in shadows, waiting with the patience of someone who had learned to think in decades. The wizard who killed his parents isn't gone, she said. His body is destroyed but not his existence. He fragmented himself, split his soul, which is an obscenity so fundamental that I'm honestly impressed it worked, which means whoever designed that magic understood something about the nature of existence that most wizards don't. She paused. He'll come back. He'll come looking for the child who defeated him. He'll come expecting a boy. She looked at Poseidon. He's going to find something considerably different. Good, Poseidon said, with a mildness that carried the same quality as the ocean carrying a storm front. The kind of mild that was only mild in contrast to what it was about to become. Harry had fallen asleep. Deeply, thoroughly, the complete surrender of exhausted infancy, his face slack and soft against Poseidon's chest, his breathing slowed to that deep easy rhythm of the genuinely, trustingly unconscious. Athena looked at him sleeping. There was something about this moment, the cliff, the dark water, the sleeping child, the first hour of November with the whole long shape of a story just beginning, that she felt she ought to mark in some way. She was the goddess of wisdom. She had witnessed a great many moments. She had the unpleasant skill, in high moments, of already seeing their historical significance while they were still happening, which made them both more and less real simultaneously. This moment, she could see, was going to matter. Not just to them. Not just to this child. To things much larger than any of them. The primordial spark in him was, she was still working on the full theory, but the shape of it was becoming clear, not just an accident of heredity and dark magic. It was responsive. It was intelligent, in the way that deep things were intelligent, not with thought but with direction, the way a river was intelligent about finding the sea. It had woken up because it was time. The killing curse hadn't created this. It had simply opened the door. Harry Potter had been going to wake up anyway. Sooner or later, in this generation or the next, the thing sleeping in his blood had been going to open its eyes. The curse had made it sooner. That was all. But sooner meant here, and now, and this cliff, and the two of them. He needs to sleep, Poseidon said. He is sleeping. Somewhere better than a cliff. Somewhere, Poseidon looked down at the child with an expression that Athena would have called, in someone else, tender, and she decided that was what she was calling it in him too, and they would both simply not address it directly. Somewhere good. Olympus, she said. For now. There's a wing in my library complex that hasn't been used in centuries. Quiet. Good air. I can set wards. She paused. Not the kind someone installs with a bolt on the outside of the door. Poseidon's expression went somewhere colder for a moment, and then he looked back at Harry and it warmed again. Fine. But he needs time in the sea regularly. Even as a child. Especially as a child. Agreed. We'll establish a schedule. You want to schedule his time in the ocean. I want to establish a structure that maximizes his development across all relevant domains. Yes. If you'd prefer to just throw him in the Aegean on a whim, I can note that in the schedule as unstructured aquatic exposure. Poseidon made a sound that, on a less dignified being, she might have called a snort. You've already started a schedule, haven't you? She said nothing, which meant yes. He stood up, careful with the sleeping child, and looked up the cliff path toward the road where the night lay dark and wide and empty. How much do you think the old wizard knows? About what he is? Nothing. About what the killing curse did? He knows it rebounded, but I suspect he's attributed it to Lily Potter's sacrificial magic, which was also a factor, but not the primary one. She stood and adjusted the lay of her coat. He thinks he has a weapon. A boy shaped for a specific purpose. A sacrifice. We're going to disappoint him. Enormously, she agreed. They walked up the cliff path, Poseidon carrying Harry, the Atlantic breathing below them and the stars fully out now, the clouds having cleared the way clouds sometimes cleared after something significant, as if the sky wanted to be present for whatever was starting. Athena walked beside Poseidon and thought about 10 years. About what a child became in 10 years when the people raising him understood what he was, when there was no cupboard, no bolt on the door, no calculated smallness, no systematic erosion of self. When there was instead the sea, and Olympus, and the full uncurtailed weight of what he carried being met with reverence rather than fear. She thought about the old wizard with his careful plans, his blood wards, his boy-shaped strategy. She thought about the dark wizard in his shadow, waiting, patient, planning his return. She thought about Harry Potter sleeping against Poseidon's chest with one fist curled under his chin again, exactly as they'd found him, but everything else different now. Everything else entirely, irrevocably different. She was the goddess of wisdom, and she knew, with the particular bone-deep certainty that was not prophecy but understanding, that what was starting tonight was not a rescue. It was a raising. And the world, she thought, had better be ready for what got raised. The path crested the cliff and the road opened before them, and the three of them walked into it, the goddess of wisdom and the god of the sea and the child who was not yet awake to himself but who would be, who was already in some fundamental way awake, who had reached for the ocean from 60 feet above it and laughed when the ocean came, and the night closed around them like water around a stone, leaving barely a ripple on the surface of a world that did not yet know what it had become. Chapter 2, A God's Education. The first word Harry ever said was thalassa. He was 14 months old, 14 months old when they found him, and he'd been with them for approximately 3 weeks, and Poseidon had him waiting in the shallows of a private cove on the Aegean coast, the water warm and crystal clear over white sand, and Harry was doing what he always did in the water, which was proceed with absolute confidence into depths that should have alarmed a child his age. Poseidon was a step behind him, hands ready but not touching, giving him room. The water around Harry moved differently than the water around Poseidon. It was quieter, somehow, more arranged, the way water behaved in the presence of something it recognized as authority. Harry walked out until the water was at his waist. He stopped. He looked down at the surface. Then he looked up at Poseidon with an expression of pure, concentrated wonder, and he said, clearly and precisely, thalassa. See. Poseidon crouched in the shallows and looked at this child who had just used an ancient Greek word as his first word and felt something enormous and wordless move through him. That's right, he said, his voice coming out lower than he intended. Thalassa. Harry reached down and put both hands flat on the water's surface. The whole cove went still. Every wave, every current, every movement of water within the visible bay went calm, not the false calm of glass smooth weather, but an active stillness, a held breath, something present in it. A school of silver fish turned as one and moved toward Harry like a compass needle finding north. An octopus emerged from under a rock 12 feet away, changed color twice in rapid succession, and then spread all 8 arms wide in a gesture that looked, even to Poseidon, uncannily like a bow. Harry laughed. The cove went back to normal. The waves resumed. The octopus retreated under its rock with what Poseidon privately interpreted as dignity. He scooped Harry up out of the water and held him up at arm's length, looking at him, this 14-month-old child who had just commanded a cove with both hands and the word for sea, and Harry grinned at him, the enormous toothless grin of someone who had just done something wonderful and knew it, and Poseidon said, "Wait until Athena hears about this." Harry grabbed his nose. Athena heard about it, and her response was to arrive at the cove with a stack of scrolls, 3 books, and a very purposeful expression. Poseidon watched her set up a sort of impromptu educational station on the beach with the systematic efficiency she brought to everything and felt compelled to point out that Harry was 14 months old and had approximately the attention span of a 14-month-old. "The scrolls aren't for him yet," she said, not looking up from where she was writing something in the sand with a stick. "They're for me. I'm developing a framework. A framework for raising a toddler. A framework for raising an immortal god with a primordial divine spark and significant ambient oceanic authority who also needs to learn to walk properly before he's 2. She finished writing and looked up. "He keeps trying to walk on water, Poseidon. He's nearly managing it. We need to address the developmental sequence here before he starts doing things his physical body isn't yet coordinated enough to handle." Poseidon looked at Harry, who was sitting on the sand eating a handful of it with great apparent satisfaction. "I think the developmental sequence is doing fine on its own." He ate sand. Children eat sand. Divine children who can quiet entire bays and receive obeisance from cephalopods should perhaps be redirected before. She stopped. She looked at Harry. Harry looked back at her, sand on his chin, entirely unrepentant. Something moved in her expression that she immediately controlled, but Poseidon caught it, the flicker of something that was absolutely, definitively humor, quickly suppressed. "He's doing it on purpose," Poseidon said. "He likes watching you try to stay serious. He's 14 months old. He's also a primordial divine entity waking up in a 14-month-old's body. I think he finds the contradiction funny." Athena looked at Harry for a long moment. Harry reached out, picked up another handful of sand, and appeared to seriously consider eating this one too. She crossed the beach, sat down in front of him, and held out her hand. Harry looked at her hand. He looked at the sand. He put the sand in her hand. "Thank you," she said, gravely. Harry said, "Thalassa," and pointed at the water. "Yes," she said. "And what's this?" She picked up a smooth pebble. Harry looked at it carefully. "Lithos," he said. She blinked. "Yes." She picked up a shell. "This?" He frowned in concentration, and for a moment she saw it, the deep thing behind his eyes, the ancient awareness moving through the infant machinery of his current form, reaching for a word. "Concha," he said. Then, apparently dissatisfied with this, Ostracan. Latin and then Greek. He'd corrected himself from one ancient language to another. She and Poseidon looked at each other over the child's head. "Framework," Poseidon said. "Framework," she agreed. The years moved the way years moved when gods were the ones measuring them, in layers rather than lines. Each year was a sediment, something deposited and then built upon, and Harry grew up through the layers the way a reef grew, adding complexity and color and structural depth that wasn't visible all at once but was, taken whole, staggering. They kept him on Olympus during the earliest years, in the wing of Athena's library complex that she prepared, rooms that opened onto a courtyard with an olive tree and a fountain, warm light, shelves of books in 20 languages that Harry eventually learned to climb before he learned to read them. The other Olympians were aware of him. Most of them were curious. Several were alarming about it. Dionysus stopped by once when Harry was 2 and regarded him with the sleepy benevolence of someone who had been at a symposium since approximately the Bronze Age. "He feels old," he said. "Older than new, younger than ancient. Like wine at the interesting age." He offered Harry a grape. Harry ate it and said, "Eucharisto," and Dionysus looked astonished and then delighted. "He thanked me in classical Greek. Athena, he thanked me. I've known gods for 3,000 years who couldn't manage that level of courtesy." Hermes was worse. He came by regularly, moving at his characteristic speed of something about to happen, always with gifts and opinions, and Harry adored him, which Athena found logistically inconvenient because Hermes's influence on a small child manifested primarily as an accelerated development of the ability to steal things without being noticed. Harry was 3 years old when he took Hermes's caduceus right out of his hands and ran with it across the library courtyard cackling, which was, Athena had to admit, excellent speed for a 3-year-old. Poseidon caught him before he rounded the fountain. He retrieved the caduceus. He then spent approximately 10 minutes in the corner of the courtyard, facing away from Harry and Athena and Hermes, shoulders doing something that Athena declined to categorize as shaking with suppressed laughter, because she was doing the same thing and needed someone to maintain dignity. Ares came once, and only once, drawn by the unusual power signature and also, Athena suspected, by the same territorial instinct that made him check in on anything that smelled of war potential. He stood in the doorway of the library wing and looked at Harry, who was 4 at this point and completely absorbed in a scroll that was technically in Linear B, a writing system that had been dead for 35 centuries, but which he'd apparently decided was not a sufficient barrier to reading. "What is that?" Ares said, pointing at Harry. "His name is Hadrian," Athena said. "And he has a name, so use it. He's reading Linear B." "Yes. He's 4. He's 4 and reading Linear B, yes." Harry looked up at Ares with those green eyes. He looked at him with the specific, dispassionate assessment of someone who had been raised by the goddess of wisdom and had therefore absorbed the habit of analyzing everything he looked at before deciding how much attention it deserved. He appeared to reach a conclusion. He looked back at his scroll. Ares's eyes narrowed. He looked at me like I was a problem he'd already solved. "You'll get used to it," Athena said. "I did." "Did you?" "Eventually." Ares left. Harry finished the scroll and asked Athena what a Linear B agricultural inventory from Pylos had to do with the oceanic trade routes of the late Bronze Age, which was, she recognized, not the question a 4-year-old had any business asking, but was also exactly the question that revealed he'd understood what he'd read and was connecting it to previous knowledge. She spent the next 3 hours talking with him about Bronze Age maritime economics, and he sat cross-legged on the floor and listened and asked questions and occasionally corrected her secondary sources, and this was, she thought, one of the better afternoons she could remember. He was 6 when Poseidon first took him to the deep ocean. Not the shallows, not the cove, not the coastal waters where sunlight reached the bottom and the fish were colorful and familiar. The deep ocean, the abyssal dark, the crushing pressure, the cold that was not cold but something else, something more fundamental, the places where the ocean became genuinely alien even to the things that lived in it. Athena had concerns about this plan. She expressed them with her characteristic thoroughness: the structural dangers, the psychological impact, the questionable wisdom of taking a 6-year-old to a depth that would liquefy an adult human in seconds without divine protection. Poseidon listened to all of this with the patient expression of someone who had already decided and was simply waiting for the list to end. "Are you finished?" he said. "I have 3 more points." "Are you finished with the useful points?" She gave him the next 3 points anyway, because they were, in fact, useful. He acknowledged 2 of them and incorporated them into his plan, which was more than he usually conceded, so she considered it a reasonable outcome. They went at dawn, Poseidon taking Harry by the hand and walking into the sea from a beach in the Mediterranean until the water closed over their heads. Harry, who had been doing this since he was 18 months old, regarded the transition from air to water as entirely unremarkable. He breathed the water easily, had done since the first time Poseidon had taken him under, when Harry had simply looked at the water in his lungs with the same expression he gave everything new, which was interesting. "Tell me more." They went down. Past the sunlit zone where the reefs were bright and the schools of fish moved like thought. Past the twilight zone where the light went blue and then purple and the creatures got stranger, more luminous, more angular. Into the midnight zone, the real dark, where the only light was what the creatures made themselves, the cold chemical fire of bioluminescence, blue and green and white in the black water, impossibly beautiful and completely indifferent. Harry held Poseidon's hand and watched all of it with his eyes very wide. And then the deep. The real deep. The abyssal plain, 5 kilometers down, where the pressure was 600 atmospheres and the water was 4 degrees above freezing and the seafloor stretched in every direction like the floor of a dream, flat, vast, dusted with marine snow, the slow drift of dead organic matter falling from 5 kilometers above like continuous soft rain. Strange white crabs picked across the bottom. A cluster of hydrothermal vents breathed superheated mineral water into the dark, surrounded by tube worms and pale shrimp that had never seen sunlight and never would. Harry let go of Poseidon's hand. He didn't go anywhere, he just let go, and stood on the abyssal floor with the marine snow drifting around him and the bioluminescent dark on all sides, and Poseidon watched him and did not interfere. Harry spread his arms. The pressure, which was doing nothing to either of them because they were both, in their own ways, beyond it, seemed to recognize him. The water moved. Not dramatically, not a cove going still, but something more total than that. Something that was about the deep water specifically, the ancient water, the water that had been down here since the ocean was young, and it moved toward Harry the way iron moved toward a magnet, slowly and inevitably and without any sense of force because force wasn't required. It simply went where it was drawn. The tube worms turned. The pale shrimp came closer. A giant squid materialized from the dark at the edge of visibility, 12 meters long, eyes the size of dinner plates, an animal designed by evolution to be invisible and terrifying, and it came toward Harry with a deliberateness that had nothing to do with predation and everything to do with attention. It stopped 10 meters away. Its chromatophores rippled, patterns racing across its skin in complex sequences, and Poseidon, who could read the language of deep-water creatures the way he read everything oceanic, understood what it was saying. It was asking who Harry was. Harry answered. He didn't speak aloud, his voice would have been swallowed immediately in this water. He answered the way the water answered him, with something that was not language but was like language, something that moved outward from him in the water the same way the hydrothermal vents moved heat outward from the seafloor. The squid's chromatophores went still. Then they rippled again, differently, a response, in the deep-water alphabet, and what it said was something like acknowledged and something like remembered and something like finally. Harry was 6 years old, 5 kilometers underwater on the floor of the abyssal plain, and a 12-meter giant squid had just told him it remembered him. He reached out one small hand toward the squid. It extended one tentacle, cautiously, until the tip of it touched Harry's fingertips. Then it turned and disappeared into the dark, gone in an instant, and Harry watched the darkness where it had been for a long time before he looked back at Poseidon. Poseidon had been in the deep ocean for approximately 4,000 years. He had seen everything it had to offer. He had never, in 4,000 years, seen anything quite like this. Did that squid, he said, using the water speech, the deep ocean communication that wasn't exactly sound, just tell you it remembered you? Something like that, Harry said. He looked at his own hand, the hand that had touched the tentacle. It said the water remembered. That the deep water remembers everything that's ever been in it. He looked up. Does it? Yes, Poseidon said. It does. Then it remembers me from before, Harry said, with the simple, direct confidence of a 6-year-old stating something obvious. From whatever I was before I was this. He looked around at the dark and the marine snow and the distant glow of the vents. I like it down here. I know, Poseidon said. So do I. They stayed for another hour, and Harry learned to move in the deep water, not swimming, which was a surface concept, but something deeper than swimming, something more like belonging, moving through it the way the current moved, without fighting the pressure or the cold, simply occupying the space with the authority of something that had a right to be there. Poseidon watched him and felt, for the first time in what felt like a very long time, genuinely proud of something. Athena's education was different from Poseidon's, and Harry knew from early enough that he couldn't clearly remember a time without knowing it. The difference wasn't in how much they cared, the difference was in how they cared, and he absorbed both forms the way he absorbed salt water and oxygen, as essential components of what he was. With Poseidon, the lessons were the world itself, the ocean and its moods, the way an earthquake felt from the epicenter, the language of deep-water creatures, the history that lived in water because water remembered. With Poseidon he learned to feel the Earth's interior through the soles of his feet, to sense weather systems by the quality of the air pressure on his skin, to walk into the eye of a storm and understand it from inside. Once, when he was 7, Poseidon took him to the site of the Thera volcanic eruption on the ocean floor, the drowned caldera of a Bronze Age catastrophe, and sat with him in the dark water above the ancient devastation and told him about the day it happened, and Harry listened and felt the sorrow of it and the power of it and understood, in a way he wouldn't be able to articulate for several more years, that power and devastation were not separate things but aspects of the same thing, and that the ocean did not distinguish between them, only held them both equally in its long memory. With Athena, it was different. With Athena, lessons happened in rooms. Not boring rooms, never boring rooms. The library wing had grown as Harry grew, which was either a function of Olympian architecture's responsiveness to need or a function of Athena's meticulous planning, and he suspected it was both. By the time he was 6 it extended through 3 courtyards and had shelves that went up to ceilings 40 feet high and a reading room with a skylight that showed not the actual sky above Olympus but a sky of Athena's choosing, sometimes the night sky over Athens, sometimes the Alexandrian noon, once, for an entire week, the sky over Troy as it appeared in the 10th year of the siege, which Harry had found deeply absorbing and which Athena had apparently used as an object lesson in the strategic limitations of any war of attrition. She taught him everything. Not in sequence, not the way mortal schools proceeded, building foundations carefully and adding floors one at a time. She taught him in the way she'd clearly decided matched his nature, which was, all at once, trusting him to find his own structure in it. She would set him a problem that required mathematics and mythology and practical knowledge of metallurgy and ancient geography all at the same time, and she would watch him work through it, and she never told him he was wrong unless he was wrong, and when he was wrong she never softened it. That's incorrect, she said, the first time he got a strategic analysis badly wrong. He was 7, and he'd been analyzing the Battle of Thermopylae, and he'd concluded that Leonidas's choice to die there was tactically pointless. The 300 bought time but didn't change the outcome, he said, confident. They changed 3 things, she said. Tell me what they were. He thought about it. He thought about it harder. He came up with 2. She made him find the third himself, which took him most of the afternoon, and when he got it, the way the Thermopylae story propagated through Greek culture, creating a mythology of resistance that functioned as a force multiplier for every subsequent Greek military effort against Persia, she simply said, yes. Now you see it, and moved on. He was 8 the first time she took him to an active battlefield. Not a modern one, Athena was many things and careless was not among them. An ancient one, a reconstruction, a way of showing him what she'd been teaching him in theory, which was that war was not what stories made it. They stood on a hillside above a remanifested engagement from the Peloponnesian War, a small unit action, and she talked him through it the way she talked him through everything, precisely, without drama, expecting him to keep up and always expecting him to have questions. He had questions. He always had questions. By the time he was 9, his questions were genuinely challenging, which she recognized as one of the best possible signs, because a student whose questions stopped being challenging was a student who'd stopped thinking. If the Spartan system produced better soldiers, he said, 9 years old, sitting on the steps of the courtyard with an olive from the tree he'd been throwing up and catching with the distracted ease of someone whose attention was entirely elsewhere, but the Athenian system produced better citizens, and the Athenians eventually lost, what does that prove? What do you think it proves, she said. Nothing on its own. Because they also had a plague and a failed Sicilian expedition and Persian money in the Spartan camp. So the variable is too contaminated to draw a clean conclusion. He caught the olive. Which means the question itself is the wrong question. She looked at him. What's the right question? He thought about it. Whether the thing that makes a better soldier and the thing that makes a better citizen can be the same thing. And whether any system has ever actually achieved that. She was quiet for long enough that he looked up at her, which he did when her silences shifted quality. There were her thinking silences, her assessing silences, and her "that's actually a remarkable observation" silences, and he'd learned to tell them apart. This was the last kind. "Not yet," she said. "But that's what good systems are trying to build toward." "Are you trying to build toward it?" he asked. "With me?" Another silence. This one different again, personal, which her silences rarely were. She sat down on the step beside him, which she also didn't do often, preferring to be in motion or standing when she thought. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly what I'm trying to do." He thought about that. Then he threw the olive up again. "I think it's working," he said. "Don't be smug." "I'm not being smug. I'm being accurate. There's a difference." He caught it. "You told me the difference." She said nothing, but he was fairly sure, from her profile, that she was doing the same thing Poseidon did when he was suppressing something, the very controlled containment of an expression she didn't want to have in public. The languages came easily, came so easily that "easily" was the wrong word, as if he didn't learn them so much as remember them, which was Poseidon's theory and which Athena hadn't fully endorsed but hadn't dismissed. By 10 he was fluent in ancient Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, Old Norse, Aramaic, Egyptian hieroglyphics in both reading and context, and something he and Poseidon called watertongue that didn't have a written form in any human alphabet. He picked up modern English almost as an afterthought, in addition to Italian, French, and enough of 6 other living languages to navigate. Poseidon gave him the combat. Not the formal, choreographed combat of divine tradition, the real kind, the kind that happened in water and on unstable ground, the kind where the situation was always changing and the only reliable weapon was the one you adapted from whatever was available. Harry took to it with a directness that Poseidon recognized. It wasn't aggression, wasn't the performance of toughness. It was simply the same complete investment he brought to everything, this whole-body willingness to be present in what he was doing that meant when he fought, he was entirely there, no reservation, no held-back breath. By the time he was 9, he could hold his own against creatures that had been fighting since before Rome. By 10, he was winning. Athena gave him the strategy. She gave him games, not children's games but war games, games that had been used to train military minds for centuries, and then variants she devised herself, and eventually games he invented, the two of them playing against each other across boards that sprawled across entire rooms, and she won more than she lost but the margin narrowed every year. They gave him, both of them, something that Athena had identified in the framework she'd written on the beach in the sand the night she'd watched Harry eat a handful of the same beach, something she hadn't been sure she could give but which seemed, as the years passed, to be taking root in him as surely as everything else. She hadn't put a label on it in her framework. She'd just written a question mark. What the question mark stood for was this: the capacity, in someone with power enough to do as they pleased, to choose to be genuinely kind. Not generous. Not merciful in the way the powerful were sometimes merciful, from height, as an exhibition. Just kind, warmly, personally, specifically kind, in the way of someone who found other people genuinely interesting and genuinely worth something. Harry had it. She wasn't sure where it came from. She suspected it was native to him, something the divine spark carried, some elemental property of the primordial, that the oldest things in existence had a tenderness for the fragile ones, the way the ocean was tender with the shore even as it wore it away. Or possibly it came from Poseidon, who for all his volatility was in his natural state the most fundamentally warm-hearted of all the Olympians. Or possibly, she allowed, it came from her. She had never had occasion to find out, before now, what she was like with a child to raise. She had been born complete. She had had children but had not raised them. They'd emerged, in the fashion of divine progeny, with the skills and orientations already built in. She had never had the experience of watching something small and helpless and brilliant grow, year by year, into itself. She found she was, as it turned out, somewhat better at it than she would have predicted. He was 10 years old and they were on the coast of Iceland in early January when the letter arrived. They'd been watching the northern lights, Harry lying on his back on a black sand beach with volcanic rock on 3 sides and the Atlantic on the 4th, and Poseidon beside him, and Athena sitting slightly apart the way she usually did, her weight leaned back on her hands, watching the aurora with the detached aesthetic appreciation she gave beautiful things, which was significant appreciation but delivered without fanfare. Harry had his hands behind his head and was watching the lights move across the sky in green and purple curtains, and his face in the aurora light was the face of someone completely at home in themselves, not peacefully, not boringly at home, but the dynamic home of someone who was exactly where they were supposed to be in the universe, doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing, which in this case was lying on volcanic sand watching the sky. The owl arrived at considerable speed for something that had presumably crossed significant altitude to get here, and it dropped the letter on Harry's chest with the practiced accuracy of an owl that had found its target and was extremely pleased with itself. Harry picked up the letter without sitting up. He looked at the seal, Hogwarts, the crest, the 4-quarter motto. He looked at the address, which said Mr. H. Potter, and then, in a way that suggested the enchantment on the letter was doing its best and having a confusing time of it, several different location lines that kept overriding each other, as if the magic didn't know what to make of his current address. Hogwarts, he said. Poseidon was up on one elbow looking at the letter. Athena had turned her head. Your invitation to the wizarding world, she said. Yeah. Harry sat up and broke the seal and read it. He read it twice, and the northern lights continued overhead, and the owl found a nearby rock formation and settled on it with the patience of a creature that had no doubt about the eventual outcome. They want me at school. They want Harry Potter at school, Poseidon said, with a nuance on the name that acknowledged the difference. Same person. Harry folded the letter. He looked at Poseidon, then at Athena, then at the sky. He was quiet for a moment, running something through in his mind. She could see him doing it, the same way she saw him run all his assessments, that quick and thorough internal calculation. There's a dark wizard soul fragment in there, isn't there, he said. At Hogwarts. Something down deep. I've felt it from here. Athena had wondered when he'd bring that up. She had felt it herself, during the past year, the specific, deeply unpleasant resonance of a deliberately divided soul, attached to something physical, pulling on the metaphysical fabric of the place where it was housed. She'd told Poseidon about it. She had been waiting to see if Harry would identify it independently. Yes, she said. He split his soul. Multiple times, we think. Harry nodded slowly. He was quiet again. Then he said, I want to go. To Hogwarts, Poseidon said. Yes. And not because of the soul fragment, though that needs dealing with. He turned the folded letter over in his hands. Because there are people there. My age. People I've never, he paused, and for a moment she saw something younger than his usual composure move through his face, something straightforwardly honest. I've never had anyone my own age. I want to see who they are. The honesty of it, the simple uncomplicated desire for peers and connection, landed in the quiet between the three of them with the weight of something important. Poseidon looked at Athena. She looked back at him. You'll go as Harry, she said. Your full name, everything. We don't hide what you are, we simply don't announce it where it doesn't need to be announced. I know, Harry said. And you don't defer to anyone's system of power or status. Not in that world. I know, Harry said again. And when someone is, small, or afraid, or performing cruelty from insecurity, Athena. He looked at her directly. Green eyes, steady, 10 years old and older than that in all the ways that counted. I know. She looked at him. At this child, this person, she corrected herself, because he was that now, unmistakably, whom she had found in a cupboard with a bolt on the door and carried to a cliff above the Atlantic, whom she had watched learn the deep grammar of the world and ask questions that challenged her and make friends with giant squids and lie on Icelandic beaches laughing at the northern lights. At the thing the primordial spark had become, woven through with ocean and wisdom and the specific hard-won warmth of someone who'd been raised by two ancient, difficult, extraordinary beings and had somehow remained, through all of it, genuinely himself. "All right," she said. "I know you know." He smiled, one of his real ones, the ones he didn't perform for anyone, just let happen when something made him glad. Then he looked at the owl on its rock. The owl looked back. "Is there a supply list?" he asked. "There'll be a second letter," Athena said. "There usually is." "Right." He tucked the Hogwarts letter into his jacket and lay back down on the volcanic sand. "Next September, then," he said, with the easy forward-looking confidence of someone who had never once felt apprehension about a new thing, only curiosity. He looked back up at the northern lights. "What is that color, exactly, in the lower band there? Between the green and the purple?" "I don't think it has a name yet." Poseidon lay back down beside him and looked up. "It doesn't," he said. "We should name it." "Athenian Sea Twilight," Harry said, and looked at Athena, and grinned. She looked at the color. It was, she had to admit, an accurate description. "That's several words," she said. "Worth it," said Poseidon. The aurora moved across the sky in its new and named colors, and the owl waited patiently on its rock, and the Atlantic breathed beside them in the dark, and Harry Potter lay on the black sand between a goddess and a god and thought about Hogwarts, and the year ahead, and the dark thing he could feel from here even on this beach in Iceland, waiting for him to come and find it. He wasn't worried about it. That was perhaps the most significant thing about him, and the most difficult to explain to anyone who hadn't seen him grow into it. He wasn't afraid. Not because he was unaware of danger. Not because he was careless, or stupid, or performing bravado. But because he had been raised to understand, at the deepest level, what he was, and what he was something the world had not seen in a very long time. Something that did not know, in its bones, how to be afraid of the dark. The dark, after all, was just where the deep water was. And he had been comfortable there since he was 6 years old. Chapter 3, The Boy Who Could Drown the World. The Hogwarts Express smelled like coal smoke and old upholstery and the specific nervous energy of several hundred children all trying to appear less frightened than they were. Harry stepped onto the platform at King's Cross through the barrier between 9 and 10, he'd passed through it the way he passed through most things, without hesitation, curious about the transition, and stood for a moment just breathing it in. Platform 9 3/4. The scarlet engine idling at the head of the train, releasing slow plumes of steam that drifted up into the vaulted space and softened everything slightly, made the whole scene look like a memory of itself. Families clustered along the platform in varying states of emotional management, first-years clinging to parents, older students performing the particular studied nonchalance of the experienced traveler, owls complaining from carriers, a toad getting away from its owner with impressive commitment for an animal that moved that slowly. Harry had a trunk, a barn owl he'd named Theron, and the quiet settled attention of someone who found everything genuinely interesting and was trying to decide where to start. Athena and Poseidon were not here. They'd been clear about this, his entry into Hogwarts had to be his own, not flanked by Olympian gods, which would have been counterproductive on approximately every level. They'd said their goodbyes that morning at the coast, in the particular way they each had, Poseidon with a hand on his shoulder and a look that communicated several entire conversations without using any words, and Athena with a brief, precise embrace and 3 pieces of strategic advice that she'd prefaced by saying, "I know you know all of this but I'm telling you anyway." He'd let her tell him anyway. He watched a boy with bright red hair and freckles trying to manage a trunk that had apparently decided to be difficult about the wheels, and a woman who was clearly his mother supervising with the air of someone who had done this several times before and was still emotionally invested each time. Behind them, 4 more redheads in various states of departure readiness. A large family, loud and warm, the kind of warmth that was structural rather than performed. He watched a girl arrive alone, walking briskly, a large book open in front of her and her trunk rolling obediently behind as if it had been specifically instructed not to give her any trouble. She was reading while walking, which Harry appreciated as a skill, and she consulted a piece of paper, and then the book, and then the paper again, with the focused energy of someone who had prepared thoroughly for this and was running their preparation against reality to check for discrepancies. He watched a group of what were clearly older students pass without paying attention to any of this, too comfortable in their belonging to notice the first years, which told him something about the sociology of the thing. And then he watched a blond boy arrive with two heavy-set companions and two adults, parents, presumably, though the word felt like it should mean something warmer, and proceed down the platform with the specific quality of movement that announced, at some fundamental level, "I own this place." The confidence wasn't natural, Harry assessed. It was performed. It was the confidence of someone who had been told repeatedly that they were at the top of a hierarchy and had built their entire behavioral architecture on that premise, which made it, underneath, a confidence that required constant maintenance and was therefore, structurally, quite fragile. Harry found this interesting. The blond boy's father was pointing at the train and saying something with a closed expression, giving instructions, not having a conversation. The boy was listening with his chin slightly elevated. The mother stood adjacent to them both and looked at various points in the middle distance, which was the expression of someone who had learned to be elsewhere internally while remaining physically present. Harry filed all of this and boarded the train. He found a compartment 2/3 of the way down that was empty, settled Theron's carrier on the overhead rack, and opened the book he'd brought, not a textbook, one of his own, a Mycenaean navigational text he'd been working through for the past month. The station noise filtered through the window, and the train shifted slightly, settling, and then the compartment door opened. The girl with the book looked in. She looked at Harry, then at the compartment, then at her book, then back at Harry. She appeared to be running a rapid social calculation. "Is anyone sitting here?" she asked. "Not yet," Harry said. She came in, arranged her things with the precise efficiency of someone who had a system, sat down across from him, and immediately opened her book. Harry looked at the title. Hogwarts, A History. "Any good?" he said. She looked up with the expression of someone who had not expected the person across from her to say anything. "It's extremely informative," she said. "I've read it twice already, but I wanted to review the chapter on the enchantments before we arrive. The ceiling alone is worth understanding properly. It's bewitched to reflect the actual sky outside, which is a fascinating application of sympathetic magic, because it requires a constant channeling enchantment rather than a one-time casting, which raises interesting questions about whether it's maintained actively or passively." She said all of this the way people talked when they'd been waiting for someone to ask and were making the most of it now that the opportunity had arrived. Harry listened to the whole thing and then said, "Passively, I think. Active maintenance would need a practitioner physically involved. It's probably key to a natural resonance between the ceiling and the external atmosphere. You'd set it once in the right conditions and the sympathetic link does the rest." She stared at him. "How do you know that?" "Sympathetic enchantments are how most large-scale magical architecture works. The ceiling at the Oracle's chamber at Delphi operated the same way, keyed to atmospheric conditions rather than active oversight." He paused. "I'm Harry." Another moment of staring, and then she recalibrated visibly, the way good thinkers did when new information required adjusting the existing model. "Hermione Granger," she said. "How do you know about Delphi?" "I've been there. The Oracle hasn't operated for nearly 2,000 years. "Right, but the ceiling enchantment is still running. The building's still there." He turned a page in his book. "The structure of the magic is actually better preserved than most documented examples because no one's interfered with it." Hermione looked at him with the specific expression of someone who had arrived at school expecting to be, if not the most knowledgeable person present, certainly among the top percentile, and was recalibrating that expectation in real time. Harry found her expression interesting. He found her interesting, not because of the knowledge, which was impressive for someone their age but not what made her interesting. What made her interesting was the recalibration itself. Most people, when surprised, got defensive. She got curious. She leaned forward slightly. "What's that you're reading?" she asked. "Mycenaean navigational text. 14th century BC. Is that linear B?" "Yes. You can read linear B. It's not that hard once you have the syllabary down, he said, which was not entirely true but was the kind of thing you said when you didn't want someone to feel bad about not reading it. The vocabulary's limited because it's administrative texts mostly. Inventories, trade records. But the navigational sections are interesting because they describe sea routes that current scholarship thinks didn't exist yet. Did they? She said. Exist yet? Yes, he said. They definitely existed. The compartment door opened again and the red-headed boy from the platform came in, slightly out of breath, with a smear of something on his chin that was probably not dirt. He looked at the compartment, clocked them both, and said, "Can I sit here? Everywhere else is full or there are 6 years in it and they're looking at me like they're considering eating me." "Sit down," Harry said. He sat down with the immediate ease of someone who defaulted to comfort in social situations, sprawling into the seat with his legs spread and his elbows out. "Ron Weasley," he said. "Harry." "Hermione Granger," said Hermione, and then went back to her book in a way that was not unfriendly but established that the conversation would need to earn her full attention. Ron looked at Harry with the evaluating look of someone trying to determine what kind of person they'd landed next to. His eyes went to Harry's forehead, to the scar, which was visible when Harry's hair fell back, and his expression shifted. He started. Harry said again, evenly. Ron blinked. "Right. Yeah." He appeared to decide, reasonably quickly, that this was the correct approach. "Have you had anything from the trolley?" "She came through at the front but I missed her. I've got some stuff from home but it's corned beef again. I've told Mom I don't like corned beef. There'll be another pass," Harry said. "The trolley comes through twice." "How do you know that?" "It says so in Hogwarts, a history," Hermione said, without looking up. Ron looked at Hermione, then at Harry. "Does she just know everything in that book?" "So far, everything she said has been accurate," Harry said. "So probably." Hermione glanced up at this with an expression that was trying not to be pleased and not entirely succeeding. Ron caught Harry's eye and grinned, a wide, guileless grin that had absolutely no calculation in it, which Harry recognized as genuinely unusual in his experience of human social interaction. He liked Ron immediately, which was the kind of thing that happened rarely enough that he took note of it. The train moved, pulling out of King's Cross, and the city slid past the windows and became gradually less city, and Harry listened to Ron talk about his brothers and the school and the things he'd been told to expect, and he listened to Hermione ask pointed questions about Ron's sources and whether he could corroborate various claims, and he let himself simply exist in the middle of it, two people his age, talking, not knowing what he was, treating him like someone they'd just met on a train. Because that was all he was to them right now. He found he liked that very much. The trolley came through and Harry bought enough for all three of them, which Ron protested and Harry ignored, and they spread things across the seats and tried various confections with the communal experiment of people facing unknown food together. The Bertie Bott's everyone flavored beans produced reliable drama. Ron got earwax, Harry got something that tasted like deep-sea brine and found it pleasant, which made Ron look at him strangely, and Hermione got a bean that she analyzed for 3 sentences before eating it. The blonde boy appeared in the doorway 20 minutes before they reached Hogsmeade. He appeared with his 2 large companions, who had the architectural quality of furniture, large, solid, present primarily to occupy space. He looked at the compartment, and at Harry, and his eyes did the same assessment and classification thing they'd done on the platform, and this time they stopped on the scar. Unlike Ron, he didn't redirect. "You're Harry Potter," he said. "I am," Harry said pleasantly. "Draco Malfoy." He said his own name with the expectation that it would mean something. Harry let a beat go by. Draco's expression adjusted slightly, not much, but Harry caught it. "You should know that in this world, who you associate with matters. Certain families have better, come in or don't," Harry said. "But you're blocking the door." Draco blinked. It was a small blink, but it was the blink of someone who had not been interrupted before, or not often, or not by someone wearing the same first-year robes he was. I was saying I heard what you were saying, Harry said. He looked at Draco with genuine interest and no particular edge, not challenging, not performing dominance, simply looking at him the way he looked at everything worth examining. You're telling me that your family name should change how I treat you. But I haven't seen what you do yet. So it doesn't. Silence. The two large companions looked at each other. Ron was very still beside Harry with the specific stillness of someone choosing sides internally. Hermione had put her book down. Draco looked at Harry for a long, assessing moment. There was something working in his expression that wasn't quite anger, it was something more complicated, the specific cognitive dissonance of a worldview encountering data it wasn't built to process. He left. His companions left with him. The door slid shut. That was Draco Malfoy, Ron said, in the tone of someone providing important context that might have been missed. I know, Harry said, and went back to his book. His father is, significant, in current wizarding political structures, yes. Harry turned a page. That doesn't change what I said. Ron stared at him. Then he looked at Hermione. Hermione looked back at Ron. Then they both looked at Harry, and the look they exchanged had in it the wordless beginning of something, a shared understanding that the person across from them was different in a way that neither of them had the context to fully characterize yet, but that both of them found, each for their own reasons, magnetic. Hogwarts arrived out of the dark like a sentence someone had been building to, all the subordinate clauses of the journey suddenly justified by the main verb of those towers against the night sky, lit gold from within, reflected in the black surface of the lake. The first years crossed in the boats and Harry sat in the bow of the last one, trailing one hand in the water, and felt the lake the way he always felt deep, cold, dark water, as a known thing, a comfortable thing. Something moved in the depths beneath the boat. Large. Curious. He pressed his palm flat against the surface. Easy, he said, in the water language, in the wavelength that wasn't sound. I'm just arriving. The giant squid, because of course it was a giant squid, surfaced briefly 50 meters from the boats, just enough for a tentacle to arc above the water and then descend again. Neville Longbottom in the boat ahead was gripping the sides with both hands and not looking anywhere near the water. Harry watched the ripples from the squid's emergence spread and settle. Did you just, Hermione started, from beside him. The lake has a resident squid, Harry said. I was just introducing myself. You were, how did you? It's in Hogwarts, a history, Harry said. The squid part. She opened her mouth, decided that pursuing this particular thread could wait, and closed it again. The castle itself was everything he'd expected and several things he hadn't, not because he hadn't researched it, but because some things didn't yield to research and had to be walked through. The magic of Hogwarts was old and it was layered, 11 centuries of it, and it had a quality he'd only encountered in a few other places, Delphi, the ruins of Knossos, the deep cave systems in Crete where the Minoans had built their first sanctuaries. The quality of a place that had been used for a very long time for the same purpose, that had absorbed the intention behind that purpose so thoroughly that the place itself had become intentional. He liked it. They were sorted in a room full of candles and the eyes of 400 students and the sorting hat, which Harry regarded with genuine curiosity as it sat on its stool and waited for the first-year line to begin. The hat was, he could tell immediately, enchanted with something considerably more sophisticated than it appeared, not just a list of houses and characteristics, but a genuine analytical intelligence of some kind, something built into the fabric of it that engaged with whoever wore it. An interesting piece of magic, genuinely interesting, and he found himself looking forward to the conversation. Names were called in alphabetical order, which put him near the end, and he watched his new classmates sorted with the specific attention he gave processes he was trying to understand. The sorting hat placed people with varying speed, some immediately, some after a visible deliberation. Hermione went to Gryffindor so quickly the hat barely touched her head, which she seemed both pleased about and trying not to show she was pleased about. Ron, ahead of Harry, got Gryffindor too, and his whole body relaxed in a way that suggested the alternative had been genuinely worrying him. Potter, Harry. The room changed. It was subtle, a collective intake, a shift in posture, the specific quality of attention that 400 people gave to one name because they all knew it. He walked to the stool and sat, and the hat dropped over his eyes and the world went dark. "Interesting," said the hat. Its voice was dry and curious, more awake than he'd expected. "I've sorted 11 centuries of students. You are, not like anything I've sorted before." "I know," Harry said, internally. The power in you, the hat seemed to be working carefully around something. "Most students I can read quite easily. You're very deep, Mr. Potter. Like trying to see the bottom of something that doesn't have one. You don't need to see the bottom. You just need to decide where to put me." "Yes. Quite. Well, a pause. You have the intellect for Ravenclaw. You have the cunning for Slytherin. You have more courage than I've felt in a student in quite some time. And loyalty." Another pause, longer. "But there's something underneath all of it that isn't any of the 4 qualities. Something that's old. And it doesn't map to houses." "Probably not," Harry agreed. "Where would you like to go? Where do you think?" "I think," the hat said, and Harry could feel it making up its mind, "that you'd be wasted anywhere that didn't have someone to keep up with you. And I only see 2 candidates in this year's class. One of them is already in Gryffindor." "Then put me in Gryffindor," Harry said. "Gryffindor," the hat announced. The table erupted. He walked to it through the noise and sat beside Ron, who was grinning the guileless grin, and Hermione was on his other side and said, under the applause, the hat took a long time. "We were having a conversation," Harry said. "About what?" "Depth." She looked at him with the expression he was starting to recognize as her specific version of "this is interesting and I'm going to find out what it means eventually." He thought it was probably going to be one of his favorite expressions, long term. The castle revealed itself over the first weeks in layers, the way good things did. Harry learned its rhythms, the moving staircases, the corridors that changed routes on certain days, the armor that occasionally offered unhelpful navigational advice, the ghosts who each had a distinct personality and varying degrees of willingness to be useful. He mapped it not the way a newcomer mapped a strange place but the way he mapped everything, by feel as much as sight, the way the magic ran through the stones, the places where it pooled and the places where it thinned, the old buried architecture beneath the castle that most current occupants didn't know was there. The classes were fine. Better than fine, occasionally, when a teacher was genuinely good at the thing they were teaching. Professor Flitwick was excellent, he taught charms with a precision and joy that Harry appreciated, and he was fast enough to catch when Harry's work went beyond the syllabus, which Harry's work consistently did. Professor McGonagall was formidable and competent and taught transfiguration the way Athena taught everything, with the expectation that you could keep up, and the willingness to work harder on the ones who couldn't, and a very limited tolerance for excuses. Professor Sprout was warm and capable and treated her plants with the same regard a person might give a classroom of students, which Harry found philosophically sound. Professor Quirrell was something else. Harry noticed Quirrell in the first week. He sat in the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom and listened to Quirrell's stammering, distracted lecture style and watched him very carefully, with everything he had, and what he found was a smell, not an olfactory smell but the specific metaphysical impression that very old, very aware beings could perceive in things that were not quite what they appeared. It was the smell of a double thing, a thing with 2 layers, and the inner layer was considerably darker than the outer one. He didn't stare. He took notes. He asked 3 questions that were specific enough to catch Quirrell's attention and then let the class end and walked out with Hermione and said nothing. "What do you think of Quirrell?" Hermione asked, on the way to lunch. "He's hiding something," Harry said. "He seems nervous." "Yes. But that's the outer layer. He dropped it there, because the corridor was full of people, and because he was still building the complete picture. The complete picture came into better focus at the welcome feast, in retrospect, when he remembered noticing the particular dark tug from beneath the school, from below the dungeons, from somewhere deeper than the architecture suggested the castle went. He'd felt it the first night and had filed it, a soul fragment, damaged and furious and patient, attached to something physical, waiting. He'd told Athena about it in a letter. They wrote regularly, encrypted in a cipher that used classical Greek and a substitution system he and Athena had devised, which was either extremely overcautious or entirely reasonable depending on your threat assessment of the wizarding postal system. Athena's reply had been brief and precise, confirmed the nature of the object. Don't engage prematurely. Observe Quirrell. He was observing Quirrell. The library became his regular afternoon project, Hermione's too, which was how they'd fallen into the habit of spending several hours there together most days, often in companionable parallel silence, occasionally in conversations that could range from medieval magical theory to whether the house system at Hogwarts served a genuinely developmental purpose or was primarily a sorting mechanism that reinforced social stratification. Harry held the latter view. Hermione held both simultaneously and thought the coexistence was the interesting part. Ron joined them sometimes, though the library was not his natural habitat. He came when he had specific questions or when he'd had enough of the common room and wanted to be somewhere quieter, and he sat at the end of the table and worked through Charm's homework with his tongue between his teeth and the expression of someone negotiating an unpleasant but manageable peace treaty. "Can you look at this?" he said one evening, pushing his Charm's essay toward Harry. "I don't think I've got the wand motion right for the Wingardium Leviosa theory part." Harry looked at it. The wand motion theory was actually wrong. Ron had confused two of the vectors, but the underlying instinct in his practical work, which Harry had seen in class, was excellent. He had good hands, natural timing. He just didn't have the theoretical framework to understand what his hands were already doing correctly. "Your wrist movement in class is right," Harry said. "But your theory says something different. Change these two," he pointed, "and your theory will match your practice." Ron stared at the corrections. "That's it. That's it. That took you 4 seconds. 3, but I didn't want to seem rude." He handed the essay back. Ron looked at him with an expression that was trying to settle somewhere between impressed and suspicious of the whole business. "How are you so good at everything?" "I'm not. I'm terrible at history of magic." "Everyone's terrible at history of magic. Binns is literally a ghost. He's been teaching the same lecture since he died and he died during the lecture, so it's not even the right one." Hermione looked up from her book with the expression of someone who had been waiting for this opening. "Binns's teaching method is genuinely problematic. Oral history is actually one of the most effective modes of historical transmission when the narrator is engaging, but he's been delivering the same information in the same order since 1928 without updating any of it, which means students from 1928 to now have all been taught the same significantly incomplete account of Hermione," Ron said. "Yes. I've got 12 inches to write about goblin rebellions." 14, she said. McGonagall upped it on Thursday. She looked at his expression and softened slightly. "I'll help you with the structure." Ron's expression moved through gratitude and mild embarrassment at needing the help in roughly equal parts, and Harry watched the two of them and felt something warm and uncomplicated that he recognized, from observation and Poseidon's descriptions, as the specific satisfaction of good company. He had not had it in this form before, the consistent, low-stakes, high-warmth presence of people his age who liked him because they liked him. Not because of what he carried, not because of what he was, not out of obligation to gods or reverence for ancient things. Just because they found him interesting and he made them laugh and they made him laugh back. He ate lunch with Ron most days and discovered that the best education in the current state of wizarding culture was actually just letting Ron talk, because Ron had strong opinions and a large family and no particular filter between what he thought and what he said, which was in its own way a significant data set. Through Ron, Harry learned about pureblood politics, Quidditch, the specific interpersonal dynamics of the Weasley family, the market value of different famous witch and wizard cards, and the ongoing question of whether Fred or George was funnier or whether it was a collaborative achievement that couldn't be separated into individual components. Through Hermione, he learned what it looked like when someone brilliant was trying to exist in a system that hadn't been built for them, not hostile, exactly, but not calibrated to what she actually was, which was someone who found everything interesting and couldn't stop herself from knowing it, and who had learned from early on that this quality made some people uncomfortable. She'd responded to this, in the time before Hogwarts, by being more, not less, by knowing everything better, by being more prepared, by staying ahead enough that competence became armoring. Harry watched her do this and recognized the strategy and thought it was a very good one for the environment she'd been in. He thought Hogwarts might be different. He thought she'd be able to put the armor down sometimes. He was patient about waiting to see. The first Quidditch lesson, not a lesson, a house tryout, but would ran it with the rigor of a military exercise, produced the discovery that Harry could fly, which was the specific non-discovery of something that the person doing it had never considered would be a problem. He sat on the school broom, pushed off the ground, and the broom went up and responded to him the way everything did when it was connected to the air and the air was connected to the sky, smoothly, immediately, with the ease of two things that had been waiting to work together. Wood nearly wept. Not literally. But nearly. "You're a natural," he said, watching Harry loop the pitch. "I've never seen anything like it. You're a natural seeker." "I'm happy to play," Harry said, because he was. He liked the sky. He didn't mention that the sky felt slightly less familiar than the ocean but considerably more familiar than it should have for someone who'd never been on a broom. The Quidditch pitch was visible from the windows of the corridor Quirrell used to walk to his office, and Harry had noted the route 3 times now. He'd also noted the route Quirrell took in the evenings, which went to the 3rd-floor corridor, the one that was off-limits, the one with the warning from Dumbledore at the start of your feast, delivered with the specific tone of someone who was warning you away from exactly the thing he needed you not to find. Harry had not attempted the 3rd-floor corridor yet. Not yet. He was building the complete picture first, the way Athena had taught him, not because he lacked the ability to act, but because premature action was how you solved the wrong problem. He let the weeks accumulate, let the picture develop, let the pieces sit in the configuration they naturally occupied, and he watched. The troll at Halloween, an 11-foot mountain troll that someone let into the castle, and the obvious question was who had the access and the motivation, gave him several more pieces. Hermione was in the girls' bathroom. He knew because she'd been upset, something Draco had said in Charms, the kind of calculated cruelty that was really its own type of structural insecurity, which didn't make it hurt less, and she'd spent the afternoon there. The troll walked into the girls' bathroom on the 1st floor with the purposeful randomness of something directed. Harry was already moving. Ron was with him because Ron was good in a crisis in the uncomplicated way of someone who hadn't overthought it enough to add hesitation. They found the troll in the bathroom and Hermione behind the sinks, and the troll was large and it smelled terrible and it was raising its club, and Harry walked directly toward it. "Harry," Ron started. "Wand out," Harry said, calm and crisp. The troll brought the club down. Harry stepped around it the way Poseidon had taught him to move in water, with the current, not against it, using the trajectory of the thing moving at you to make its force work elsewhere. The club hit the tile floor and cracked it in a 6-inch radius, and Harry came up inside the troll's reach where its arms couldn't leverage and said, very clearly, "Stupefy." The spell hit with significantly more force than a first-year's spell had any business carrying. The troll went backward into the wall and stayed there. Ron stood with his wand out in the specific posture of someone who had been prepared to act and now didn't need to but hadn't finished the intention yet. He lowered it slowly. He looked at the troll. He looked at Harry. "It didn't even, you just, one spell. It was unconscious before it hit the wall," Harry said. He turned to Hermione. "Are you hurt?" She was behind the sinks, her wand in both hands, shaking slightly. Not from fear, he thought, or not only from fear. There was something else in her face, looking at him. The recalibration expression, but larger this time, more fundamental. She was rewriting something significant. "I'm fine," she said. "How did you, that spell, one stupefy shouldn't, troll skulls are thick," Harry said. "You need to weight the intent, not the motion. Are you hurt?" "No. I'm fine." She lowered her wand. She took a breath. Then she said, very directly, which was how she did everything, "You came for me. Of course, Harry said. You'd known me 3 weeks. I know, he said. He picked up his own wand from where he'd set it to check the troll, unhurried. Does that change something? She thought about this seriously, the way she thought about everything seriously. No, she said. I suppose it doesn't. McGonagall arrived with Snape and Quirrell, Quirrell looking flustered, Snape looking at Harry with dark eyes that were doing something complicated in the region of assessment and displeasure, McGonagall surveying the scene with controlled shock. The troll on the floor. The 3 first years standing in various states of post-crisis calm. The cracked tiles. Explain, McGonagall said. The explanation involved creative editorializing from Hermione, who made herself sound like an active participant rather than the protected party, which Harry and Ron both allowed without comment. McGonagall gave them points and a brief lecture about rule following that she delivered with the specific energy of someone who had decided that the actual feeling about the situation was going to live somewhere separate from the official response. Quirrell was watching Harry during all of this. Harry let him watch. On the walk back to Gryffindor Tower, Hermione walking beside him, Ron on his other side, the 3 of them occupying the corridor with the particular energy of people who had just been through something together and were still in its aftermath, Harry felt the pull from beneath the castle again. Stronger tonight, or just more present, as if his own alertness had sharpened his sensitivity to it. He glanced down at the floor beneath his feet. Thought about what was under the dungeons. Thought about the timeline, how long Quirrell had been here, what he'd been looking for, how close he was to finding it. Getting close, Harry thought. A few months, maybe. He had time. But he should start narrowing the picture. He wrote to Athena that night, the object under the school is a theft target. Someone is actively looking for it. The same person who released the troll tonight. I believe the object is the Philosopher's Stone, Nicholas Flamel's work, referenced in a book I found in the restricted section. He paused, then added, Quirrell is carrying something. A consciousness, not his own. It feels like a divided soul, the same kind of division I've sensed from beneath the school. There is a Voldemort-shaped problem living on the back of my defense professor's head. He sent the letter, and Theron took it with the casual confidence of a bird who considered himself above ordinary owl post. Then Harry went to sleep and dreamed about the ocean, which was what he usually dreamed about, and the ocean was warm and deep and entirely unconcerned with dark wizards, because the ocean had been here for 4 billion years and had seemed considerably worse. He woke up refreshed, ready for Thursday's charms, and absolutely not afraid. Chapter 4, Philosopher's Stone, Primordial Fire. Athena's reply arrived on a Thursday morning in late November, during breakfast, when the Great Hall was at its loudest and most distracted. Theron dropped the letter beside Harry's plate with the dignified precision of a bird who considered himself better than the general owlpost chaos overhead, and Harry opened it while Ron argued with George about Quidditch strategy 2 seats down, and Hermione read the Daily Prophet with the expression of someone fact-checking every sentence. The letter was brief, as Athena's letters always were. She communicated the way she did everything, with maximum information density and minimum decorative language. Confirmed, Flamel's stone. Dumbledore is holding it for Flamel, using the school as a vault. Quirrell's possession situation is consistent with a low-corporeal entity requiring a host, Voldemort, as you assessed. The host relationship will be deteriorating him. Watch his hands. The stone is irrelevant to Voldemort's actual problem, which is that he has no body. The stone gives him life extension, not resurrection. He needs something else for full return, which means this is a preliminary move, not the endgame. Observe. Build the complete picture. Don't act until you understand what he's actually trying to accomplish in the long term. Also, Poseidon says the squid in the lake sent a favorable report. He was extremely smug about this. Harry folded the letter and ate his toast. Good news? Hermione said, not looking up from the prophet. Contextual update, Harry said. She put the prophet down. She'd been doing this more, lowering whatever she was doing to look at him when he said something she considered significant, which was a form of attention that very few people gave and that Harry had found, over the past months, genuinely valuable. "About Quirrell," she said, quietly. He looked at her. She looked back, steady and direct. He'd told her some of it, not everything, not the deep theological architecture of what was living under the school, but the shape of it, that Quirrell wasn't what he appeared, that something was wrong with the third-floor corridor, that Harry had reasons for the things he watched and the things he noted. She'd absorbed all of it with the characteristic Hermione Granger method of processing new information, which was to organize it, cross-reference it, and come back with better questions. "Something is accelerating," he said. "How do you know?" "His hands," Harry said, and nodded toward the staff table. Quirrell was sitting 3 seats from Dumbledore, his usual turban in place, a cup of tea in his hands, and his hands were the wrong color. Grayish, fragile-looking, with a waxy quality at the joints that hadn't been there in September. He was deteriorating slowly. "That's faster." Hermione looked. Her expression did the thing it did when observation aligned with theory, a small, precise tightening, the look of someone who had predicted something and found no pleasure in being right. "The host relationship is costing him," she said. Harry looked at her. "I've been reading," she said, slightly defensively. "The principle of parasitic magical possession, it's an advanced dark arts theory, which is in the restricted section, which I may have accessed through legitimate academic inquiry." "How legitimate?" "Flitwick is very responsive to a well-constructed request." Harry felt the specific satisfaction of good company again. "Yes. The host relationship is costing him. Which means Quirrell is on a timeline now. He'll move before the end of the year." "When?" Harry thought about it, not guessing, calculating, letting what he knew arrange itself into the most probable sequence. Quirrell needed the stone. The stone was past the third-floor corridor behind protections that several of the teachers had clearly contributed to. He'd need to breach them, which required both preparation and the right moment. The right moment would be when the school was maximally distracted and Dumbledore was gone. "He'll engineer a reason to get Dumbledore out of the school," Harry said. "Then he'll move." Hermione was quiet for a moment, looking at her untouched breakfast. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" "Let him get to the stone," Harry said. She looked at him. "Let him, the stone is the trap," Harry said. "Not for me. He thinks it is, but it isn't. What I need is Voldemort's full attention, face to face, for long enough to have a real conversation." He paused. "And I want to see what those protections are. Dumbledore and the other teachers built them. I'm curious." Hermione stared at him for a long moment. "You want to have a conversation with the dark wizard who killed your parents." "I want to understand what he's actually trying to accomplish." "You can't counter a strategy you don't understand. You sound like a general, not an 11-year-old. "I'm both," Harry said. "Eat your toast. McGonagall notice if you skip breakfast before Transfiguration." She ate her toast with the expression of someone filing a significant number of follow-up questions for later. December arrived and the castle went cold, frost on the inside of the high windows in the mornings, breath visible in the corridors before the warming charms took effect. Harry played Seeker in Gryffindor's first match and caught the snitch in 4 minutes, which were treated as a religious experience and Harry treated as a pleasant way to spend a Saturday morning. The crowd noise from the stands was the specific, enormous, shapeless noise of several hundred people all having the same feeling at once, and Harry found he liked it, not for the applause, but for what it represented, that many people sharing something simultaneously. He wrote to Poseidon about the match. Poseidon wrote back with opinions about aerial strategy that referenced several ancient Greek accounts of birds of prey, and then a postscript that said, "Athena is making a strategy map of Hogwarts. On actual parchment. It's taking up the reading room. I am not allowed to put my feet on it." Harry wrote back, "To be clear, you tried to put your feet on her strategy map." The response, "I was assessing the topography. It required physical contact." He kept these letters in a box under his bed and took them out sometimes not to read but to hold, the way you held a compass in the dark even when you knew where north was. Draco Malfoy was a persistent presence throughout the autumn, orbiting Harry with the specific quality of someone who hadn't made up his mind yet. He was not, Harry had decided early on, stupid. He was performing a version of himself that he'd been carefully trained into, but underneath the performance there was something quicker and more genuinely curious than the performance allowed for. He made cutting remarks about Hermione's background and Ron's family with the precision of someone who'd been taught exactly where the social pressure points were and had learned to use them, and Harry declined to engage with any of it. Not because it didn't bother him, it bothered him on behalf of Hermione and Ron, in the clean, direct way that anything bothered him. But he'd learned from Athena that responding to every provocation was how you let other people set the tempo of your interactions. You responded when it mattered, and when you responded you made it count. It mattered one evening in the library when Draco, with his two large associates, made a comment about Hermione's parents being muggles that was specifically designed to land like a slur, said in passing, for an audience of other Slytherins, loud enough to carry. Harry looked up from his book. He didn't stand. He didn't raise his voice. Draco, he said. The use of his first name in that tone stopped Draco mid-stride. He turned. You're smarter than that, Harry said. I've seen your potions work. You think clearly. Don't do this thing that you're doing because you've confused being mean with being powerful. He held Draco's eyes. They're not the same. You know they're not the same. The library was very quiet. Draco's expression went through several things. None of them were the sneer he usually deployed. He looked at Harry with the expression of someone hearing something that matches an internal argument they've been losing and finding the experience of it strange and unpleasant. He left without saying anything. His associates looked at each other and left with him. Hermione was looking at Harry with an expression that was harder to read than her usual ones. Most people just ignore it, she said quietly. Most people don't think it'll change anything. Do you? Not today, Harry said. But the accumulation of correct assessments changes things eventually. He went back to his book. He's paying attention. That's enough for now. Dumbledore left on the 14th of June. Harry knew because he felt the shift in the castle the way he felt barometric changes, a specific quality of absence, a gap in the structural magic, the way a river felt different when the thing that had been shaping its course was no longer there. He was at dinner when it happened, the sudden clean note of Dumbledore's magical presence removing itself from the ambient space of the school, and he looked up from his shepherd's pie and thought, now. He finished dinner. He went to Gryffindor Tower. He told Ron and Hermione he was going to the library. He went to the third-floor corridor. The locked door yielded the way all locked doors yielded to him, without argument, without force, simply the recognition between itself and him that resistance was a concept that required both parties to agree to it. He went through. The first protection was a plant, Devil's Snare, enormous, occupying the chamber below the trapdoor with the enthusiastic colonization instinct of something that had been left alone for months in good growing conditions. It reached for him. He walked through it the way he walked through the deep ocean, with the calm of belonging, with the authority of something the plant's evolutionary history had no framework for. The tendrils that wrapped around his ankles released almost immediately, the plant recoiling from contact with something that felt wrong to its predatory instincts in a way it couldn't categorize. He dropped through into the next chamber. Keys. 1,000 winged keys circling the vaulted space, and a locked door, and a broom provided for what was clearly intended as an aerial-seeking challenge. Harry looked up at the swarm of keys for approximately 4 seconds, located the one that mattered, older than the others, differently weighted, the one that moved with a slight irregularity that said it had been used recently, and it came to him. Not because he summoned it, though he could have. Because he reached out and let the air carry it, the way you let a current bring you something rather than swimming to retrieve it. He opened the door. The chess set was magnificent and he walked past it without stopping, because there was no one with him who needed the game's logic to be satisfied and the enchantment was designed to require a game, not a player, and he was already through the door before the enormous stone pieces had fully registered his presence. The troll in the next chamber was already unconscious, which told him Quirrell had come this way already tonight, had dealt with it, and was ahead of him. Harry looked at the unconscious troll briefly. Then he went on. The fire. 2 locked doors with purple and black flames, and a table with bottles, and a logic puzzle worked into the potion selection. He stood in front of the potions table and read the riddle on the parchment and solved it in the time it took most people to read it twice. He took the right bottle, walked through the black fire, felt it not at all. Fire had always been somewhat indifferent to him, which he attributed to the primordial nature of the spark he carried, and came out on the other side. The mirror of Eriste stood in the last chamber. And in front of the mirror stood Quirrell. Quirrell was not stammering. The quality of distraction and nervousness he wore in the corridors and classrooms of Hogwarts was entirely absent. He stood with the posture of someone who had been maintaining a performance for months and was now, in private, simply himself. Or not himself. The self that was in control here was not Quirrell's. He heard Harry come through and turned. His face was grey. His hands were grey. His eyes were very bright. "Potter," he said, in a voice stripped of the stammer, smoother and cooler than the voice Harry had heard all year. "I was wondering if you'd follow." "You left a path," Harry said. He looked at the mirror. The stone wasn't in the mirror yet. Quirrell was standing in front of it and he'd been standing in front of it, Harry could see from the agitation in his posture, for some time. "You can't see it. The mirror shows what one desires most," Quirrell said. "What I desire is the stone. But the mirror shows me." He stopped. "What does it show you?" Harry asked, genuinely curious. Quirrell's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Which was an answer. Harry looked at the mirror. He looked at his own reflection, and his reflection looked back. It was just him, no one around him, no changed circumstance. His reflection reached into its pocket and held something up, and he felt the familiar weight of it, the stone. Cool and smooth in the reflected hand. He felt the weight in his actual pocket. He looked down. The stone was there. He hadn't done anything to cause it. He'd simply looked at his reflection holding it and felt the desire that the mirror was designed to detect, and his desire wasn't for the stone itself. He had no interest in immortality that came in a small red rock. He was already immortal. His desire was to resolve this situation correctly, and the mirror, apparently, had assessed that the stone in his pocket was what that required. He closed his hand around it. "Step aside," said a voice. Not Quirrell's voice. The voice came from behind Quirrell, from the back of his head, which Quirrell's turban had been concealing for an entire school year, and the turban unwound now, falling away, and Harry looked at what was there. A face. Pressed into the back of Quirrell's skull like a seal pressed into wax, white, flat, with red eyes and the suggestion of a nose that was more absence than feature. It looked like a death mask. It looked like something that had been human and had made the decision to move in a direction that humans stopped covering. Harry looked at it with interest. "Harry Potter," the voice said, through the face on the back of Quirrell's head. The voice was different from the one he'd heard through Quirrell's mouth. This one was cold in the specific way of deep water or deep space, cold that wasn't the absence of warmth but the presence of something else entirely. "Give me the stone." "Good evening," Harry said. A pause. "You're not afraid," Voldemort said. "No," Harry agreed. "You should be. Maybe." Harry turned the stone over in his fingers inside his pocket, feeling its weight, its warmth. It had warmth, surprising and genuine, the warmth of a thing alive with very old magic. "Or maybe I came down here specifically to talk to you, and being afraid would make that conversation harder." Another pause. Longer this time, and it had a quality to it, not the pause of someone choosing words, but the pause of someone recalibrating. Harry recognized it. He'd seen it in Draco, smaller scale. The pause of a worldview encountering something it wasn't built for. "You came to talk," Voldemort said. "I came to understand," Harry said. Give me the Quirrell problem and the immediate stone problem. I'm not giving you the stone, but you knew that before you asked, so those are both just context. I came to understand what you're actually doing. And what do I appear to be doing? Surviving, Harry said. Badly. In a state that isn't really living, attached to a host who's deteriorating, pursuing an object that gives you more time in a body that isn't yours rather than the restoration you actually need. He looked at the face on the back of Quirrell's head with the same steady, clear attention he gave everything. The stone is a temporary solution to a permanent problem. So the question I have is what your permanent solution looks like. Silence. Quirrell's body trembled. Not from cold. You're 11 years old, Voldemort said. Yes, Harry said. You speak like someone considerably older. I've had good teachers. The Sorting Hat's records show you went to Gryffindor. A child who walks into this room without fear, who assesses the situation in the first 30 seconds, who asks the question no one else has ever thought to ask me. The red eyes moved over him, and Harry felt the probing quality of a mind attempting to breach another mind's defenses, the specific cold of legitimacy aimed at his thoughts. It was like watching a wave try to dent the continental shelf. Is not typical of that house. The hat said I'd be wasted anywhere that didn't have people who could keep up with me, Harry said. It was right. Another probe. Harry let it hit the outer surface of his mind and dissolve there, like sea spray on granite, without response. You're blocking me, Voldemort said. The first real edge in his voice, not anger, more like the readjustment of someone who expected a door to open and found a wall. I'm not doing anything, Harry said. You're just not strong enough in this form. You know that. That's why you need the stone. Then give it to me, Voldemort said, and the voice dropped into something colder, something that had the specific quality of the word command when it was used by something that had never been told no. Give it to me, and I will not harm you. I have no quarrel with you, Potter, only with those who kept you from what you should have been. We are, in many ways, alike. We're not alike, Harry said, without heat. He didn't say it as a rejection of the comparison, he said it as an accurate assessment. The way he'd said anything inaccurate was incorrect. You spent your life believing that mastery over death was the ultimate power. You split your soul to make yourself unkillable. You made yourself into something that death couldn't reach. He paused. I'm already what you made yourself into, an abomination trying to become. Not because of what I did but because of what I am. And I'm telling you, from the inside of that you've been pursuing the wrong question your whole life. The chamber was very quiet. Quirrell's body was sweating. His hands, Harry could see from here, were starting to blister where he was in contact with the air, with the castle, with the ambient magic of a space that Harry had been walking through for 9 months. You are immortal, Voldemort said, slowly. Yes. How? That's the interesting question, isn't it? Harry looked at the stone in his hand. He'd taken it out of his pocket, and it sat in his palm, warm and red and alive, its magic pulsing with the slow rhythm of something that had been keeping a man alive for 600 years. Not how you made yourself into something death couldn't catch. Not how you forced mortality into a form death couldn't see. But how something is genuinely, naturally, constitutionally beyond the reach of it. He closed his hand around the stone. What you made of yourself is an echo of what that is. A bad copy. Like hearing a song once and trying to reconstruct it from memory and getting most of the words wrong. Then teach me, Voldemort said. Harry looked at him. At the face on the back of Quirrell's deteriorating head, the red eyes bright with something that wasn't quite hunger but shared its architecture. You don't want to be taught, Harry said. You want the answer handed to you so you can possess it. You've never wanted to learn anything, you've wanted to acquire it. There's a difference. A philosophical difference. While I exist like this, yes, Harry said. A philosophical difference. The exact difference, in fact, that explains why you're in this condition and I'm standing across from you on a Thursday evening in June feeling fine. Voldemort was silent for a long moment. The quality of the silence was different from the ones before. This one was thinking, genuinely thinking, and Harry watched it happen. The red eyes moved over him with something that had stopped being threat assessment and started being something more complicated. "You knew I was here," Voldemort said. "All year. Since October. And you waited. I was building the complete picture. And now? Now I have it," Harry said. "You'll go from here. Not because I'm forcing you, your host is failing and you know it, and this form can't carry the stone's magic even if you had it, which you don't. You'll go and find another way. A better way, probably, than what you've been doing. You'll come back in a form that actually works." He met the red eyes. "When you do, I'll be here." "As a threat?" Voldemort said. "As a fact," Harry said. "I'll be here and I'll still be interested in the same conversation. You're not stupid, you're one of the most capable magical minds I've encountered in 11 years of comprehensive education, which is a limited sample but includes some significant benchmarks. You've just been asking the wrong question for about 60 years and it's compounded. When you come back with a body and the ability to have a real conversation rather than trying to steal things from people, I'm genuinely interested in having it." Another long silence. "You're offering me," Voldemort started, and stopped, as if the sentence had no ending he could form around what Harry had said. "I'm not offering you anything," Harry said. "I'm telling you what is. The offer can be declined. You can come back with the intention of killing me, which is something you've apparently been committed to since before I could walk, and we can have that version of this instead." He put the stone back in his pocket. "But I thought you should know there's another version available." "Why?" Voldemort said, and this time the word was genuinely asking, stripped of the cold and the threat, something underneath it that was bare in the way very old pain was bare when someone stopped performing around it. Harry thought about how to answer that. He thought about what Athena would say. He thought about what Poseidon would say. He thought about 11 years of education that was fundamentally an education in the question of why, in the understanding of motivation beneath action, in the belief that nothing was pointless and no one was beyond the reach of the right question asked correctly. "Because you're the most significant magical threat in this world," he said. "And I prefer to understand things rather than just defeat them. Defeating you is the easy version. The easy version is also the boring version." Quirrell's legs buckled. Not dramatically, a slow, structural failure, the body finally running out of whatever it had been running on, the host no longer capable of sustaining the weight of what it carried. Quirrell went down, and as he went down the presence on the back of his head released. Harry felt it happen, felt the specific metaphysical sound of a tethering relationship dissolving, and the thing that was Voldemort in this form, this partial, divided, borrowing form, rose out of the collapsing body the way smoke rose from a fire that was going out. It passed over Harry. Through him, technically, it had nowhere else to go and the room was small, and when it hit him, the primordial spark did exactly what it always did when something death-adjacent made contact, it flared. Not aggressively. The way a fire flared when wind hit it, simply more of itself, briefly and completely. The cold thing passed through him and was gone, dissipating, scattering, the diminished soul fragment unable to hold its coherence against the specific, old, total light it had passed through. The chamber was quiet. Quirrell was on the floor. Harry crouched beside him and checked, alive, barely, the tether gone and the body in serious distress. He needed medical attention. Harry stood and looked at the mirror of Eriste, which was showing him nothing now, just the room reflected back, himself standing in it, the stone in his pocket, the unconscious man on the floor. He took the stone out and looked at it. Warm in his palm. 600 years of Flammel's extended life sitting in a small red rock. Harry thought about what Athena had said about it being irrelevant to Voldemort's actual problem, and about what it meant that someone had been carrying this thing for 6 centuries as a solution to mortality while the actual nature of things beyond mortality was walking around in a school in Surrey. He put it in his pocket and went to find Dumbledore. He found him, instead, at the top of the staircase, because Dumbledore had been informed of Quirrell's absence from the castle by the castle's own enchantments, which tracked the staff, and had returned from wherever he'd been sent with a speed that suggested he'd been expecting this eventuality for some time. Dumbledore stood at the top of the stairs with his wand in hand and his expression doing the specific thing it did when he was recalibrating, the small, precise shift behind the eyes of a man who had built a plan and was encountering data that didn't fit it. Harry came up the stairs. He reached the top and looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked back. He was looking for something, Harry understood, looking for fear, for injury, for the effects of an encounter with Voldemort on an 11-year-old child. He was looking for the boy he'd placed on a doorstep 10 years ago, the boy shaped for a purpose, the weapon he'd been careful with, protected, preserved. He was finding something considerably different. "The stone is intact," Harry said. He placed it in Dumbledore's hand. "Quirrell is in the chamber below. He needs medical attention immediately, the host relationship terminated, his body is in distress." He paused. "You should contact Flamel about the stone. He should be given the choice about what happens to it. It's his." Dumbledore looked at the stone in his hand. Then up at Harry. The blue eyes, always depicted as twinkling, and they were, usually, but not right now, were doing something Harry recognized from a small number of very good thinkers encountering something they hadn't predicted, genuinely, completely absorbing new information. "What happened down there?" Dumbledore asked. "I talked to him," Harry said. "To Voldemort?" "Yes." "Are you?" "I'm fine," Harry said. "He isn't, but that's ongoing." He held Dumbledore's gaze. He didn't look away. "You should know that the situation is more complex than a theft attempt on the Philosopher's Stone. He'll come back. In a better form. In a form that doesn't require a host." He paused. "When he does, he'll have more resources than he does now. The measures you have in place for that eventuality should be reviewed." Dumbledore was very quiet. He looked at Harry with an expression that Harry let him have, that was the expression of someone significantly revising their understanding of a situation they thought they had understood, and it deserved space. "You are not what I expected," Dumbledore said. "No," Harry agreed. "I imagine not." He started down the corridor toward the hospital wing, then stopped. "Professor McGonagall should be told about Quirrell as soon as possible. She's efficient in a crisis. She'll manage it correctly." He glanced back. "You were going to send me to the Dursleys this summer." Dumbledore's expression shifted slightly. "Don't," Harry said, not unkindly. "I don't live there. I haven't lived there since the night you left me on the doorstep." He looked at Dumbledore for a long, clear moment. "I know you thought the Blood Wards would protect me. I know there was reasoning behind it. But it's not where I live, and it's not where I'll be going." "Where, Harry, where have you been?" "Somewhere good," Harry said. "With people who know what I am and chose to be there." He turned back to the corridor. "Good night, Professor. I'd go to Quirrell now if I were you." He walked down the corridor, his footsteps steady in the dark. Behind him, he heard Dumbledore move, quickly, with the purpose of someone who had multiple things to do and the intelligence to know which order they needed to happen in. Good, Harry thought. He was a smart man. He'd get there. The hospital wing was quiet when he got back. Madame Pomfrey, alerted by the castle's own perception of an injured person, was already heading in the direction of the third-floor staircase with a kit and the efficient movement of someone who had been managing Hogwarts emergencies for decades. Harry sat on the edge of an empty bed and sent a thought out to Theron, who was in the Ollery. "Tell Athena, stone secured. Voldemort dispersed from host. No injuries." He listened. The last line was the important one. He listened. Hermione found him 20 minutes later, appearing at the hospital wing door in her dressing gown with her hair wild and her expression the specific combination of relieved and furious that people who cared about you wore when you'd done something dangerous and come back from it. Ron was behind her in mismatched socks, holding a chocolate frog with the abstracted confusion of someone who'd grabbed the nearest thing on the way out of the common room. "You went down there," Hermione said. She said it the way people stated something that was simultaneously obvious and incomprehensible. "I did," Harry said. "Without us. You weren't ready for what was down there." He said it without apology but also without dismissal, factually, the way he said factual things. "Next time there's something in this school that needs addressing, I'll tell you earlier." "Next time," Hermione started. Was there a next time implied in that? Ron said, from behind her. "There's always a next time," Harry said. He looked at both of them. "Voldemort is not gone. He's scattered, temporarily, and he'll reconstitute over time. What happened tonight is a delay, not a conclusion. There will be a next time." He paused. "I'd rather face it with people who know what they're walking into." Hermione looked at him. She had the expression she got when she was processing something that required adjusting her fundamental model of a situation, and this time the model being adjusted was specifically about him, about what he was, what he could do, what the gap between Harry Potter of Gryffindor first year and whatever had walked into the chamber beneath the school tonight actually consisted of. She was smart enough to know she didn't have the full picture. She was brave enough to decide that was okay, for now. "Right," she said. She sat down on the bed across from him. "Tell us everything." Ron sat beside her, opened the chocolate frog, and held it out. Harry took a piece. Outside, the castle was quiet, the summer night pressing warm against the old stones, the lake dark and still, and somewhere in the depths of it the giant squid moved in the lightless water, patient and aware, and the stone was in Dumbledore's hands, and Quirrell was alive, and Voldemort was scattered on the wind like ash from a fire that wasn't out. Just dormant. Harry looked at his two friends, who were sitting forward in their respective beds and their respective dressing gowns at midnight in the hospital wing, watching him with the specific attention of people who had decided this was their story too, and felt the warm uncomplicated thing that had been growing since September with the consistency of something that knew what it was and where it was going. "From the beginning," he said, and told them. "Not all of it. Not Olympus or the deep ocean or Athena's library or the squid at age 6 that had spread its arms like a bow. That part was his, and it would keep, and there would be time. But the shape of what had happened tonight, the conversation, the stone, the moment when something dark and powerful had, for the first time in its existence, listened rather than attacked, that part he gave them." Hermione asked 17 questions. Ron asked 4, but 2 of them were the best ones. By the time they went back to the common room, the castle had gone fully quiet around them, and the year was ending, and the story was not. Chapter 5, The Weight of Olympus. The summer after first year had a different quality to it than the summers before. Harry noticed it the first morning back at the coast, the particular Aegean cove where Poseidon had first taught him to move in the shallows, the water the specific pale turquoise of early morning before the sun got high enough to flatten the color. He was sitting on a rock at the waterline with his feet in the sea and a cup of tea going cold beside him, watching the horizon, and what he noticed was that he was thinking about Hermione's 17 questions and Ron's 2 good ones with the same attention he usually gave the horizon, which meant that Hogwarts had embedded itself in his thinking at the level where the things that mattered lived. That was new. Poseidon found him there and sat on the adjacent rock with the easy movement of someone who had been sitting on sea rocks since before the concept of comfort furniture existed. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at the horizon. "How bad was it?" Poseidon said. "The stone situation? Not bad. Quirrell is alive. Voldemort is scattered but not gone. The stone is with Dumbledore and will probably be destroyed, which is the right call even if Flamel won't agree immediately." "That's not what I asked." Harry looked at him. Poseidon was watching the water with the expression he had when he was giving Harry room to arrive at something in his own time, the patient expression, the oceanic patience that wasn't passive but active, attentive, waiting with purpose. "The face," Harry said. "On the back of his head. I knew it was there. I'd known for months. But seeing it was different from knowing it." He paused. He killed my parents. Yes. I stood in a room with the thing that killed my parents and had a conversation with it about philosophy. He picked up a flat stone from beside the rock and turned it over in his fingers. And it was the right call. I know it was the right call. He listened. He'll think about what I said. It changes the shape of what comes next, even if only slightly. But, Poseidon said. But there was a moment, after Quirrell went down, when the dispersal happened, when the thing that killed my parents passed through me, and I wanted, he stopped. He looked at the stone. I wanted to hold it there. Keep it from leaving. Not to have the conversation anymore. The sea moved between the rocks. A wave came in and retreated. That's honest, Poseidon said. It was brief, Harry said. I didn't do it. The calculation was right, holding it there and ending it would have been the wrong move, it would have made him a martyr and destroyed the possibility of a real resolution and left the remaining soul fragments unsecured. He turned the stone over again. But the want was there. It should be there, Poseidon said. If it wasn't, I'd be concerned. You're not a weapon pointed at him, you're a person who lost his parents to him. He reached over and took the stone from Harry's hand, examined it, threw it flatly across the water. It skipped 7 times before it sank. The want being there and you choosing correctly anyway, that's not a failure. That's what good judgment actually looks like when it's working under real conditions. Harry watched the last rings of the stone skip, spread and dissolve. The philosophy conversation was interesting, though, he said. Was it? He spent 60 years operating on a framework that treats power over death as the terminal goal. He's brilliant, genuinely, structurally brilliant in the way that builds systems, and he's been pointing that brilliance in one direction for 60 years because it's the only framework he has. Harry looked at his feet in the water. I told him he'd been asking the wrong question. He didn't argue with me. He just went quiet. That's significant. I know. A man who's been asking the wrong question for 60 years being told that clearly for the first time by someone who is constitutionally what he was trying to become. Harry paused. It'll either make the next encounter worse or it'll make it something more interesting. I genuinely don't know which. Good, Poseidon said. Not knowing is the beginning of finding out. Harry smiled, brief and real. You sound like Athena. Don't say that where she can hear it. She'll be insufferable. They sat on the rocks as the morning warmed, and Poseidon talked about a volcanic activity he'd been monitoring in the Tyrrhenian Sea, and Harry listened and asked questions, and the conversation moved the way their conversations always moved, through depth and surface, and the summer opened around them with the unhurried quality of something that knew it was good and wasn't rushing toward anything. Athena arrived on the 3rd day with scrolls and a look on her face that Harry recognized as the specific expression of someone who had been patient about a thing they needed to discuss and had now run out of patience. She sat across from him in the courtyard under the olive tree and put the scrolls on the table between them and said, without preamble, the Ministry of Magic is aware of you. Harry poured her tea. How aware? Aware enough to have opened a file. They've been aware that Harry Potter's location has been unknown for 10 years, which they attributed to Dumbledore's arrangements, but the events at the end of term generated specific reports. A first-year student incapacitating a mountain troll with a single stunning spell. The same student catching a snitch in 4 minutes. The same student's wand logs showing magical output at levels that technically require recertification above 7th year. She picked up her tea. They're not alarmed yet. They will be. And Dumbledore? Also aware, more thoroughly than the Ministry. He's been doing research. She looked at Harry with the directness she gave all important information. He went to the Dursleys' address. He found the house. He found the 10-year-old records. He's smart enough and has enough access to old magic to start asking the right questions about what happens when a primordial divine spark wakes up in a wizarding bloodline. Will he find answers? He'll find the edges of the question. The actual answers aren't in any wizarding text. She set down the tea. He came to me. Harry looked at her. He knows where to look, apparently, she said, with something that was not quite dry humor but lived in that neighborhood. Old enough and wise enough to know that when a thing doesn't fit in your world, you look at the world adjacent to yours. He presented himself at a temple in Athens with impressive dignity for a man in those robes and asked to speak with whoever was relevant to the case of a child with a primordial divine spark in a wizarding bloodline. What did you tell him? Enough, Athena said. Not everything. I told him that Harry Potter was under our guardianship, that he had been since the night of October 31st, 1981, that he was not now and had never been living on Privet Drive, and that the blood ward dissolved because he outgrew it within the first months. She paused. I also told him that his strategy involving the boy as a weapon and a sacrifice was not one I would permit to proceed. How did he take that? Better than I expected. He's genuinely humble in the structural sense. He has the kind of intelligence that, when presented with undeniable information, updates rather than defends. It takes him a moment, but he gets there. She looked at the scrolls on the table. He's going to be a more useful ally than an obstacle, provided he understands the situation correctly. He doesn't fully understand it yet. Yet, Harry said. He will. I'm patient. You're writing him a reading list, aren't you? She moved two of the scrolls slightly, which was as close as she came to admitting anything with her hands. A contextual framework, she said. Harry drank his tea and thought about Dumbledore standing in an Athens temple in his robes and asking, politely, to speak with whoever was in charge of the situation regarding a particular extraordinary child. He found he liked the image. It said something about Dumbledore that was good, that when his map stopped working, he put it down and looked for a new one instead of insisting the territory was wrong. What about the Ministry, he said. The Ministry, Athena said, is a more complicated situation. The Ministry's first move came in August. It arrived as an owl, official, sealed with the Ministry crest, the spinning wheel of magical creatures and wands that Harry had seen in Hermione's books. It was addressed to Mr. H. Potter and had evidently taken the better part of the summer to locate him, which said something about the quality of the tracking enchantment they'd used. The letter requested his presence at the Ministry of Magic for what it called a voluntary registration consultation regarding his exceptional magical profile, which was the kind of phrasing that put every word under glass and asked you to look at it very carefully. Poseidon read it over Harry's shoulder. Voluntary, he said, with the specific quality he gave that word when it was doing work it wasn't designed for. Exceptionally voluntary, Harry agreed. He wrote back, "Thank you for your letter. I will attend your voluntary consultation on the date proposed. Please note that I will be accompanied." He signed it Harry J. Potter and sent it with Theron, who added his own editorial emphasis to the delivery by arriving at the Ministry Owl office during what appeared to be a busy morning rush and dropping the letter on the senior dispatcher's desk from a height. The consultation was in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, in a room that was trying very hard to be merely administrative and succeeding in a way that made it feel like the administrative version of a holding area. 3 wizards and 1 witch, all in ministry robes, arranged behind a table with parchment and quills and the studied neutral expressions of people who had prepared extensively for this meeting. Harry arrived with Athena. He had not warned them about Athena, because she had not asked him to, and because the question of warning the Ministry of Magic that you were bringing the Goddess of Wisdom to a bureaucratic consultation had a kind of inherent absurdity to it that he decided not to engage with. He simply arrived, and Athena was beside him, wearing the specific quiet intensity she deployed in institutional settings like armor, not formal, not theatrical, just genuinely present in a way that made rooms reshape themselves around her. The ministry officials rearranged their expressions. "Mr. Potter," said the senior official, a thin man with an air of careful precision. "Dawlish," his badge said. "Thank you for attending. We had understood you'd be unaccompanied." "My guardian," Harry said. Dawlish looked at Athena. Athena looked at Dawlish. The silence held for 3 full seconds. "I see," Dawlish said. He looked at his parchment. "Well, Mr. Potter, the purpose of this consultation is to discuss certain, readings that have come to our attention from various monitoring charms in place at Hogwarts School. Specifically, magical output readings that our standard classification scales have had some difficulty, that is to say, which have produced readings that are, off your charts, Harry said. Somewhat outside our standard parameters, yes. How far outside? Dawlish looked at the witch beside him, who looked at her parchment with the expression of someone who had written a number down and was preparing to say it out loud for the first time. Our standard scale runs to 9, she said. Your readings at various points during the academic year were between 11 and 14. A scale can be extended, Harry said. That's not a fundamental problem, it's a measurement problem. Mr. Potter, our concern isn't the scale. Our concern is the source of those readings. Dawlish set down his quill. Standard wizard magic, even at extraordinary levels, has a signature we recognize. Yours has an additional component. Something our instruments identify as non-standard. Non-standard, Harry said. Pre-standard, the witch said quietly, and then looked like she wished she hadn't. Athena spoke for the first time. She spoke once, in the conversational tone she used for everything, the tone that never needed to be raised because it was already the most authoritative sound in the room. What you're identifying as non-standard is divine spark. A primordial inheritance. Your instruments were not built to read it because no instrument designed after the founding of your ministry has encountered it before. The correct response to that data point is to update your frameworks, not to convene a regulatory meeting about the person who generated it. Dawlish looked at her. He looked at Harry. He looked back at her. And you are, his guardian, Athena said. As he told you. Yes, but, the Ministry of Magic, Athena said, still conversationally, has jurisdiction over the magical practices of British wizards. It does not have jurisdiction over divine inheritance, primordial lineage, or the developmental arc of an individual whose nature substantially predates your institution. She folded her hands on the table with a precision that was more final than most people's arguments. If you have questions about his welfare, I can answer them. If you have questions about his magic in the context of your safety protocols, I can answer those also. If you intend to file documentation suggesting that his nature requires regulation, that documentation will be incorrect, and you should know before you file it that incorrect documentation about this particular individual will be read carefully by people considerably older and less institutional than the four of you. The room was very quiet. The fourth official, who had not spoken yet and had been occupying his chair with increasing discomfort throughout, said, "Is she," and then appeared to decide against finishing that sentence. The consultation is concluded, Athena said. Good morning. She stood, Harry stood, and they left. In the corridor outside, which was ministry green and busy with people who didn't look up from their own purposes, Harry said, "You could have let them finish." They were going to request a suppression assessment, Athena said, walking at her normal pace, which was slightly faster than most people's purposeful pace. That's a formal ministry process for placing restrictions on an individual's magical practice. I wasn't going to sit through that sentence. Suppression assessment, Harry said. For your protection, they would have said. That's how they'd have framed it. She didn't look at him, but there was something in her profile. For your protection. To keep others safe from you. To give them oversight of what you do and when. She paused for exactly one step. No one is suppressing anything about you. Not while I exist. Harry looked at her. At the clean profile, the eyes forward, the pace that didn't waver. He thought about a bolt on the outside of a cupboard door and what the person who'd installed it had told themselves about protection, and what Athena had thought about that bolt in the dark hallway of a Surrey house 11 years ago. Thank you, he said. She didn't respond to that. She walked. But he caught the thing she almost did with her expression and filed it where he kept things that were true and important and didn't need to be said aloud. Second year started with a car. Ron and Fred and George arrived in a flying Ford Anglia to rescue Harry from what Ron had apparently decided was a dangerous domestic situation, based on an owl from Harry that had said, in its entirety, "I'm staying with Poseidon for the summer, all fine, see you at school, P.S." The squid in the lake told Poseidon you tried to say hello at the end of term and he said to tell you the form was good. Ron had interpreted this letter as a cry for help, which Harry thought said something interesting about Ron's interpretive framework, but the car had been fun to fly and the impulse behind it had been genuine, so he'd enjoyed the visit. He'd been at the Burrow for a week when the letter arrived, another one in the Greek N substitution cipher, from Athena, and he'd read it in the garden behind the gnome shed while Ron threw gnomes over the fence with the happy efficiency of someone who found this genuinely satisfying. Diary. Riddle's diary, almost certainly. The soul-splitting technology is consistent, a fragment of Tom Riddle pre-1945, bottled in an object. It'll be deployed this year. Likely through an intermediary, someone connected to pure blood circles who can introduce it into the school through a student. The diary will present itself as a voice, a relationship, a gradually deepening confidence. It will be looking for a host. A pause in the writing, a slight change in pressure. Watch the younger ones. The ones who are already isolated. Harry folded the letter and looked at Ron throwing gnomes. Ron had the form wrong on the release, his wrist snapped too early, which was why they were only going about 15 feet. Harry waited until he'd run out of gnomes and then said, "Does Ginny write much?" Ron looked at him. "My sister?" "Not, she started this year, why?" "She seems quiet." "She's nervous about school." "First year." Ron found another gnome under the bean plants and held it up. "She's mentioned you about 14,000 times if that's what you're asking. I told her you're normal and she didn't believe me." "She shouldn't be isolated," Harry said. "She's not isolated, she's got loads of friends from the village, at school," Harry said. "Make sure she's not isolated at school." Ron looked at him. He had the expression he developed over the past year for Harry saying things that sounded sideways until they didn't, the expression of someone filing information for later use. "Is there something I should know?" "Not yet," Harry said. "Keep an eye on her." "She's my sister, I always keep an eye on." "Good," Harry said. "Carry on." Ron threw his gnome, got the wrist wrong again. Harry stepped up beside him, adjusted the angle of his shoulder, said, "Now," and Ron threw the gnome 32 feet. Ron looked at the distance and then at Harry. "How do you know how to throw a gnome?" "Poseidon coaches a lot of things," Harry said. The burrow at night was the kind of warmth that came from inside a thing rather than from outside, the warmth of a house that had been full of people for decades, that had absorbed them and was making the warmth back. Harry lay in the guest room with the ghoul in the attic making its periodic noise above him and thought about Athena's letter. A diary. Someone would give it to a student. Someone connected to pure blood circles who wanted it inside the school. The Malfoys had been prominent at the bookshop in Diagon Alley during the back-to-school shopping. Harry had seen Draco with his father, and had watched the specific quality of that relationship more carefully than Lucius Malfoy had noticed. Lucius was interesting the way Draco was interesting, but with the additional layer of a man who had made choices and built an identity around them and no longer had the flexibility of someone who hadn't yet fully committed. He looked at his son with pride that had the quality of ownership. He looked at everyone else with a sliding assessment that placed them on a hierarchy he maintained with the careful vigilance of someone who needed the hierarchy to validate his own position in it. He would be the intermediary. He would do it through his son, which was the kind of layered cruelty that looked like something else until you saw it clearly. Harry thought about Draco. Thought about the library silence, the "you're smarter than that." Thought about the careful way Draco moved around his father at the bookshop, the slight physical adjustment that wasn't deference so much as self-editing, a child who had learned to occupy less space when his father was present. He wrote to Athena, Lucius Malfoy. Through Draco, probably without Draco knowing what he's carrying. "I'll watch where it goes." Then he went to sleep, and in the morning Molly Weasley made eggs that were the specific comfort of something cooked with complete investment, and he ate them at the long kitchen table surrounded by Weasley noise and felt, as he had started feeling, the warm uncomplicated thing. School started and the diary appeared in October. Not to Draco, somewhere else, somewhere Harry hadn't predicted, and the prediction error was instructive. He'd assumed Lucius would use the most direct channel. He'd underestimated how much Lucius wanted insulation from what the diary was going to do. It went to Ginny. Ron noticed she was quieter than she'd been in September. Hermione noticed she was losing weight. Harry noticed she was writing in a diary with increasing intensity, the way you wrote to something writing back, the concentrated absorption of a private conversation, and he noticed what the diary was doing to her, the slow drain of it, the color leaving her face week by week the way color left a thing being fed on. He told Ron. He told Hermione. Then he found Ginny in the library one Wednesday evening, sitting alone at a table in the charms section where no one usually sat, the diary open in front of her and her quill moving with the absorbed automaticity of someone half elsewhere. He sat down across from her. She jumped, then flushed, then arranged her expression with the painful effort of someone who had been thoroughly embarrassed and was trying to recover. "Harry, sorry, I didn't, can I see your diary?" he said. Her expression went through several things. Defensive, confused, the instinct to refuse, and then something underneath those that was, relief. The specific relief of someone who had been waiting for someone else to notice and was now trying to manage the fact that they'd been noticed. "It's just a diary," she said. "Ginny," Harry said, simply. She looked at him. He looked back. He wasn't performing concern, he wasn't performing anything. He just looked at her the way he looked at everything that mattered, with full attention, which was its own kind of statement. She pushed the diary across the table. He didn't open it. He put his hand flat on the cover and felt it, felt what was in it the way he felt the soul fragment beneath the school in first year, felt the specific metaphysical signature of a divided soul's fragment, sealed in black lacquered boards, cold and hungry and patient. It was a piece of a 16-year-old Tom Riddle, and the piece knew exactly what it was and what it was doing. He could feel the intelligence in it. Predatory. Sophisticated. The specific kind of predatory sophistication that was aware enough to be patient about what it was doing to a child. He picked it up. "Hey," Ginny started. The diary resisted being picked up. Not physically, it had no physical means, but in the way cursed objects resisted when they recognized something that could unmake them. Harry felt the resistance and then felt the calculation in it, the diary assessing him, probing, the fragment of Tom Riddle encountering the metaphysical equivalent of the thing that had scattered Voldemort in June. "Tom," Harry said. Ginny made a sound. "I know you're in there," Harry said, to the diary, conversationally. 16 years old, 1942, the year you found out about Horcruxes and thought this was a clever application of the principle. You picked a student. A lonely first year. You did it slowly, carefully, with a patience that's genuinely impressive and genuinely despicable simultaneously. He turned the diary over in his hand. "I want you to stop." The diary was warm in his hand now, the specific warmth of something active and aware and, he thought, somewhat alarmed. "What are you doing?" Ginny whispered. "Talking to the thing in your diary," Harry said. "It's a piece of someone. A very old piece of someone who made some significant errors." He looked at Ginny directly. "You haven't done anything wrong. This was put into your possession by someone who knew what it was and wanted it in the school. None of what's happened is your fault." She looked, the expression moved through her face in a way he'd seen before, when he told Hermione of course in the bathroom after the troll. The specific expression of someone who has been carrying something privately and hearing it addressed directly for the first time. "How long have you?" she started. "Ron asked me to watch out for you in August," Harry said. "Not because anything was wrong, because he loves you. I noticed the diary in October." He set it on the table, face down. "This doesn't go back to your room tonight. I'm going to take it to Professor McGonagall. She'll think I had it, she'll think someone planted a cursed object on a first-year student," Harry said. "Which is what happened." He stood. "Come on. I'll go with you. She stood. She was shaking slightly, the delayed physical response to relief after prolonged tension, something he recognized from the few times he'd seen it in others and the few times he'd felt something adjacent to it himself, always in Athena's library after a difficult problem resolved. "Harry," she said, at the library door. He looked back. "The diary, it told me things about you." "It said you wouldn't," she stopped. Started again. "It said you didn't care about people like me. That you only cared about, it was trying to keep you from talking to anyone who might help you," Harry said. "That's what that kind of thing does." He held open the door. "Come on." McGonagall's office at 10 in the evening was lit with the warm precision of someone who always worked late and had organized her space accordingly. She looked at Ginny, then at Harry, then at the diary he placed on her desk, and her expression went through the controlled sequence of a very good thinker absorbing multiple pieces of information simultaneously. "I believe this is a Horcrux," Harry said. "A fragment of a soul sealed in an object. Specifically a fragment of Voldemort's soul from approximately 1942. It was placed in Ginny's possession at Diagon Alley, I believe by Lucius Malfoy, who added it to her school books during the supply run. Ginny had no knowledge of what it was." He paused. "I also believe it's connected to whatever has been happening in the castle, the petrifications." McGonagall looked at the diary. She looked at Harry. She reached forward and pressed her wand to the diary and performed a curse detection charm that produced an immediate, sharp result, her wand recoiling slightly, the air above the diary going briefly cold. "Merlin," she said quietly. "It needs to be destroyed," Harry said. "But carefully. Destroying a Horcrux requires something with enough force. I'm working on that." Working on, McGonagall stopped herself. She had, over the past year and a half, developed what Harry privately categorized as her Harry Potter expression, which was the expression of a highly competent, rational woman who was regularly required to suspend the parts of her framework that said this is how children work and substitute something considerably more open-ended. "I will take this to the headmaster tonight." "That's the correct call," Harry said. "Tell him I believe there are more. Not all in the school, elsewhere. Objects he needs to start looking for." "More," McGonagall said. "Soul fragments. Multiple." He met her eyes. "The soul splitting is why killing him once didn't work. It's why he came back from my parents' house. He divided himself enough times that destroying one form doesn't end him. Until all the pieces are found and destroyed, he remains in the world." He paused. "I'm telling you so that when I bring you the information as I gather it, it has context." McGonagall was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "You should sit down, Mr. Potter." "I'm all right standing." "Then I am going to sit down," she said, and sat behind her desk with the controlled movement of someone managing the specific internal adjustment of receiving a comprehensive picture that significantly expanded their understanding of a situation. She looked at the diary. Then at Ginny, who was sitting in the chair against the wall looking wrung out and relieved and young in the particular way first years looked young when the weight of something had been lifted. "Miss Weasley," McGonagall said, with a gentleness that Harry noted as characteristic of her at her best, the warmth she carried that her precision sometimes covered but that was always there. "You're all right?" Ginny nodded. "Good." She looked at Harry. 5 points to Gryffindor seems inadequate." "I don't need points," Harry said. "I know," she said. "It's the available currency. I'm working with what I have." There was, in that, something that Harry recognized as McGonagall's version of humor, dry and structural and entirely contained. He appreciated it the way he appreciated all things that were exactly what they were. He went back to the common room via the long route, because the long route went past a window that looked south toward the lake, and he stopped at the window and looked at the water, black and flat and breathing under the November sky, and thought about what Athena had said over the summer: "The measures you have in place should be reviewed." Several measures had now been reviewed. The Horcrux in the school was identified and would be destroyed. The chamber, There was still a chamber, still something beneath the castle. He could feel it more clearly now than he had in September, a basilisk's ancient and heavy presence and the plumbing architecture of a hidden entrance. The chamber remained open and the basilisk was still in it, and something was still controlling it because the diary was not the only control mechanism. The diary was one part of a larger structure. He thought about Lockhart, who was teaching defense this year with the competence of a man who had never been near an actual threat and the confidence of someone who had written several books about it. He thought about what the chamber needed, not a hero, not a battle, not the particular narrative of a chosen boy descending with a sword and luck. The chamber needed someone who understood what the basilisk was and why it was doing what it was doing and could address both the cause and the instrument simultaneously. He wrote to Athena, "Diary is handled. Chamber still active. I think it's being controlled by something other than the diary alone, a separate mechanism. I need to think about the basilisk." A pause. "Also I may need to talk to a snake." Athena's reply came the next morning. "The Parseltongue ability is latent in your divine nature, you've been able to do it since you were 3, you just haven't had occasion to need it. Regarding the basilisk, it is a creature of the deep and the dark, which are your territories. It is in pain. Compulsion is always pain." A pause in the writing. "Be careful, and be kind. The creature is not the problem." He put the letter away and went to herbology. The castle felt different now. He'd been tracking the petrifications, the cat, Mrs. Norris, the ghost, the Gryffindor students who'd been caught in corridors, and the pattern of them had its own logic, the logic of a predator moving on a path between point of origin and target, and the path was becoming clearer. Something was guiding the basilisk. The diary was gone but the guidance wasn't. He needed to find the other part. He was going to find it in the chamber. Outside, the lake moved in the November wind, and somewhere in the dark water the squid turned in a long, slow arc, patient in its depths, and Harry Potter walked to herbology thinking about basilisks and compulsion and the difference between the creature and the cause, and the castle held its breath around him the way it sometimes did, the old stones aware of something building in the direction of whatever was coming next. Chapter 6, The Basilisk and the Abyss. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets was in the girls' bathroom on the second floor. Harry had known this for 3 weeks before he went down. He'd found it the way he found most things, by paying attention to what the castle was telling him, which was a matter of feeling the flow of the old magic rather than following clues in the conventional sense. The castle's enchantments ran like water through its stones, and water always found its lowest point, and the lowest point of the castle's magic was a bathroom on the second floor where the taps hadn't worked since October and something cold and heavy lived in the pipes. He went on a Thursday morning in February, when the castle had been quiet for 6 days following the petrification of 2 more students, a Hufflepuff and a Ravenclaw, found in a corridor near the library, their faces locked into the specific blank stillness of petrification, which wasn't sleep and wasn't death but was its own particular wrongness. Pomfrey had them in the hospital wing. The castle had been operating under the specific anxious caution of a population that didn't know what was hunting it or from where. Harry went alone. Not because he didn't trust Ron or Hermione, he trusted them both completely, which was precisely why he went alone. What he was going to do in the chamber was not something either of them had the context for yet, and going in with people who lacked the context increased the risk to them without decreasing anything for him. He had told Hermione the night before, in the library, because she deserved to know and because she was smart enough to handle it. She had, predictably, wanted to come. "If the basilisk looks at you," Harry had said, "I'll have my eyes closed." Hermione. "I can navigate with my eyes closed, I've practiced in the doormat, the basilisk's presence is lethal," Harry said. "Not just the direct gaze. The ambient effect. I can be in a space with a basilisk. You can't." He met her eyes. "I need you to trust me on this." She had looked at him for a long time, the look that had been evolving since first year, the look that was no longer just assessment but the accumulated understanding of 2 years of watching him navigate things correctly. "Come back," she said. Which was not agreement exactly, but it was not argument either. "Obviously," he said. She'd told him one other thing, matter-of-factly, looking at her book rather than at him, with the tone of someone reporting a research finding. "The basilisk is 1,000 years old," she said. "Salazar Slytherin bred it. Left it here." She paused. 1,000 years in a chamber. Whatever it's feeling, it's been feeling for a long time. He'd looked at her. "I read your letter to Poseidon," she said. "You read my..." Theron delivered it to the wrong person briefly. "I gave it to him, but I wasn't snooping, she had the expression of someone who had technically done an indefensible thing and was mounting a contextual defense. The point is, Athena was right. Be kind." He'd thought about that all night. Now he stood in the bathroom with the cold and the dripping taps and the specific heavy silence of a place that felt like a throat. The sink with the small snake engraved on the tap. He crouched down and looked at it, and then he spoke to it, not in English, not in Greek or Latin or any of the languages he'd learned in rooms and on beaches, but in the language that the divine spark carried that was older than all of those. Parseltongue felt like water speech but warmer. It felt like speaking from somewhere deeper than his throat. "Open," he said. The sink sank. The pipes expanded. The entrance revealed itself, a dark shaft, descending, with a slide quality to it that said whoever had designed this had considered the return trip insufficiently. Harry looked down into the dark, where cold air breathed upward with the quality of air that had been sealed for a very long time and was only recently moving again. He dropped in. The descent was longer than he expected and faster than it should have been, the slide depositing him in a tunnel with bones underfoot, small ones, old, the bones of things that had found their way here and not found their way back. He walked. The tunnel was massive, wide enough for something large to move through without effort, the walls tiled with serpents in old stonework that had not been touched or changed since the 10th century. He walked and felt the castle's deep magic change around him as he went lower, felt the specific architecture of a space that had been built for a purpose and had been serving that purpose for a very long time. He walked for 10 minutes before the first door. Stone serpents coiled on a stone door, tall enough to be monumental, and he spoke to it in the same language he'd used on the sink, a single word, and the serpents moved and the door opened. The chamber beyond it took his breath away. Not with fear. With the specific involuntary physical response to something genuinely, structurally magnificent, the chamber was enormous, pillared, flooded with a green-tinged light that came from nowhere he could identify, ancient and cold and perfectly preserved. 1,000 years. The stonework was flawless, the Slytherin aesthetic in its pure form before it had been diluted into the dark hanging Zan silver of the house common room upstairs, clean lines, serpent motifs, the architecture of someone who had built for permanence and expected to be remembered. At the far end, the statue of Salazar Slytherin. Stone, massive, severe. And at the base of the statue, coiled in a mass that took Harry a moment to fully comprehend the scale of, the basilisk. It was enormous. 60 feet, perhaps, of scaled muscle, dark green-black in the chamber's cold light, ancient in the way that things were ancient when they had lived long enough to become part of the landscape rather than inhabitants of it. It was coiled loosely at Slytherin's stone feet, its head, massive, triangular, the size of a large car, resting on the topmost coil with the specific, heavy stillness of something in very deep sleep. Harry stood at the entrance of the chamber and looked at the basilisk. He kept his eyes open. He was genuinely not afraid, which he recognized as either an accurate assessment of his own capabilities or a hubris that was about to become instructive, and he tested both possibilities against what he knew. The basilisk's kill mechanism was its gaze, the lethal light of its eyes, and the surrounding death aura that was a lesser version of the same mechanism. He knew what lived in him. He knew what the primordial spark was and how it interacted with death-adjacent things, had known since it flared warm when Voldemort's dispersing soul fragment passed through him. The basilisk's gaze killed mortal things. He was not, in the relevant sense, mortal. He walked down the length of the chamber. His footsteps on the wet stone were the loudest thing in the room. He walked toward the basilisk slowly, not cautiously, with the specific quality of someone choosing their pace rather than constrained by their fear. The water dripped from the ceiling. The green light moved slightly, the way light moved through water. He stopped 15 feet from the basilisk's head. He felt it before it moved, felt the shift in the ambient quality of the space, something that was not quite a sound and not quite a sensation but was the specific awareness of a very old thing becoming aware of him. The basilisk was ancient enough and aware enough to register his presence without opening its eyes, the way creatures that had lived in deep dark long enough developed senses that made light irrelevant. Then it opened its eyes. Harry looked directly into them. The basilisk's eyes were golden yellow and enormous and contained the specific depth of something that was very old looking at the world, and the death gaze was absolutely present in them. He could feel it, the lethal radiation of it, the thing that killed mortals and petrified those who met it indirectly. It hit him the way it always hit him when death-adjacent things made contact, the primordial spark flared. Warm, steady, entirely unconcerned. The basilisk was looking at something that death couldn't see. He felt the moment it registered. Felt the specific quality of an ancient predator's awareness encountering something outside its categorization system, not prey, not threat, not any known thing, something older than the framework of prey and predator entirely. Harry sat down, cross-legged, on the wet stone floor in front of the basilisk's head. "Hello," he said, in Parseltongue. The basilisk was completely still. "I know you can hear me," Harry said. "I know you've been down here for 1,000 years. I know someone has been directing you, telling you what to do, who to hunt. I want to talk to you about that." Silence. The dripping water. The green light. Then the basilisk spoke. Its voice was enormous, low, slow, each word carrying the weight of something that had not spoken in months, perhaps years, the specific quality of a voice that was being used again after a long disuse. It spoke Parseltongue with the accent of something 10 centuries old, and Harry adjusted his ear to it, the way he adjusted to any ancient dialect. "What are you?" the basilisk said. "Something old," Harry said. "Like you. Nothing here is like me." "That's been true for a long time," Harry said. "I'm sorry." A pause. The golden eyes blinked, a slow, enormous movement, like watching a continent shift. "You are sorry. 1,000 years alone in a chamber because the man who made you died before he could come back for you. Whatever his intentions were." "Yes. I'm sorry." The basilisk was quiet for long enough that Harry could hear the structure of the silence in it, not the silence of something ignoring him but the silence of something considering. He waited. "I was given instructions," the basilisk said. "Sealed into me. Like teeth. I cannot choose whether to follow them." "The instructions came from something in the castle? Something that recently woke up?" "A voice," the basilisk said. "In the pipes. Young. It speaks the tongue. It claims authority it does not truly have but the instructions are sealed, not claimed, they are older than the voice, they were Slytherins, the heir of Slytherin," Harry said. "Yes. The voice claimed it. The instructions sealed into me responded. I did not wish to." The enormous head moved, a slow shifting of weight, and Harry saw something in the movement that he recognized from creatures much smaller than this, the movement of something in discomfort that had been in discomfort so long that discomfort was the baseline. "The ones I hunted. The small ones. I turned my eyes away. Every time. I looked to the reflections, to the water, to the indirect. I killed no one." Harry looked at the basilisk. At the golden eyes, ancient and enormous and, he now understood, careful. "You were trying not to kill them," he said. Not in Parseltongue, in English, because some things needed to be said in the language of the world that would need to understand them. "I was sealed into instructions," the basilisk said. "Not into wanting. I have never wanted to kill the small ones." He sat with that for a moment. 1,000-year-old basilisk, commanded by compulsion, turning its kill gaze aside every time, to water, to reflections, to ghosts and cats and the indirect path, managing the best version of an impossible situation it could manage for months in the dark. The compulsion came from the diary, Harry said. The diary has been destroyed. The instructions it carried into the castle are gone. He looked at the basilisk. You're still following them. The instructions are old. Older than the voice. They are Slytherin's own working. I don't know how to, I can take them out, Harry said. The basilisk's head rose. Slightly, significantly, with the specific quality of something that had not anticipated this response. You can, not painlessly, Harry said. I won't lie to you. Removing a compulsion that's been sealed into your nature for 1,000 years is invasive. It will feel like something being pulled out of deep water. Like a current changing. He thought about how to describe it in terms the basilisk would understand. Like the tide being redirected. It's not pleasant. The golden eyes regarded him. Will I still follow them after? No, Harry said. You'll be yourself. Whatever you are, without the instruction telling you what to do with it. The basilisk was quiet for a long time. Harry waited. He had learned patience from the ocean and precision from Athena, and patience and precision both agreed that this was a moment that deserved its own time, that needed the basilisk to arrive at its answer without pressure. Yes, the basilisk said. Do it. Harry stood. He walked forward until he was beside the basilisk's head, close enough to feel the heat of it, which was significant. The basilisk ran warm, all that ancient cold stone, and it ran warm, and he put both hands flat against the scales just behind the jaw, and closed his eyes. What he did next was not magic in the wizarding sense. It was not a spell or a charm or a transfiguration. It was something more fundamental, the divine inheritance working in the way it worked when it was applied directly, which was not as a tool but as a nature, the primordial spark reaching into the structure of something and finding the place where a foreign instruction had been woven and taking hold of it and drawing it out. Like removing a splinter from something very deep. The basilisk made a sound. Not a Parseltongue word, a sound, a pure sound, low and enormous, the sound of something in significant discomfort navigating it with ancient, absolute dignity. Harry held on. The compulsion was deep, woven into muscle and scale and the architecture of instinct that was 10 centuries old, and drawing it out was not easy. It was the hardest thing he'd done in 2 years of Hogwarts, harder than the stone chamber, harder than facing Voldemort's face. This was intricate, careful, like removing a thread from weaving without damaging the cloth. He found the end of it. He pulled. The basilisk's sound shifted and then stopped. The temperature under his hands dropped and then steadied. He felt the compulsion come free, felt it as an actual thing, a sealed instruction, old and cold and tight, Slytherin's own working from 1,000 years ago, and when it came free it dissolved in his hands the way ice dissolved in warm water, gone into nothing, because compulsions without a host had no existence of their own. He took his hands off the basilisk's scales and opened his eyes. The basilisk's head was raised, fully raised, the entire 60 feet of it reorganizing into a different posture, a posture Harry had not seen it in before, which was the posture of something uncompressed, something that had been under pressure for a very long time and was now not. It moved through the chamber slowly, the first movement that was entirely its own, unguided, and the movement was different from the hunting movement he'd seen implied in the petrification evidence. It moved like something exploring. Thank you, the basilisk said. You're welcome, Harry said. What do you want? The basilisk said, turning back to him, the golden eyes steady. There is always a cost. I have been awake for 1,000 years. Everything wants something. I want you to stop petrifying people, Harry said. And I want to know if there's another compulsion source, something else in the castle that was directing you beyond the diary. The basilisk considered. There was another voice. Older than the diary voice. Sealed in something else, I don't know what. The diary voice woke first and it was the diary voice giving direct instruction, but beneath that there was something structural. Something that made the castle's architecture responsive. The pipes, the passages. Another Horcrux. Not in the school, or not in the school anymore. Something that had made the chamber responsive, that had been there from an earlier time. Possibly something Riddle had left during his school years, something different from the diary. He filed it. Full picture. He needed the full picture. Will you stay in the chamber? Harry said. For now, the basilisk said. It is my home. The only one I have. A pause. Will you come back? Harry looked at the ancient creature. The most feared snake in a world full of magical creatures, the living death gaze that had been sealed underground for a millennium, carefully not killing the students it had been instructed to hunt, managing its own compulsion with the best tools available. He looked at it and felt the thing Athena had talked about, the thing in his nature that had no better word than tender, the specific tenderness for ancient, enduring things that had been alone too long. Yes, he said. I'll come back. He walked back up the chamber's length. Behind him, he heard the basilisk settle, not the compressed coiling of something under compulsion but the loose, easy arrangement of something choosing how to occupy its own space. He didn't look back. He walked to the door, and the door opened for him, and he walked out. He was back in the bathroom in 40 minutes. He washed his hands at the non-snake taps, which worked perfectly well, and looked at himself in the mirror. He looked the same. He went downstairs. Hermione was in the corridor outside the bathroom. She was standing against the wall with a book and the specific energy of someone who had said they weren't going to wait and then waited anyway. You said you weren't coming, Harry said. I said I'd trust you, she said. That's different from not caring how it went. She looked at him carefully, the full assessment. You're fine. I'm fine. The basilisk? Freed from compulsion. Staying in the chamber. Not going to petrify anyone else. He started walking. She fell into step beside him. There's something else, though. Another Horcrux. Not in the school, but it made the school's architecture responsive to Slytherin's heir's command. It's older than the diary. Hermione was quiet for a moment, processing. You need to tell Dumbledore. I'm going to tell Dumbledore, Harry said. After lunch. After, I'm hungry, Hermione. I've been in a chamber removing a 1,000-year compulsion from a 60-foot basilisk for 40 minutes. I'd like a sandwich. She looked at him. Then she said, fair enough, which was, Harry thought, one of the things he liked most about her, the specific quality of her reasonableness when reason was called for, even when she was still in the residue of concern. They went to lunch. Ron was at the table saving seats with his elbows in the particular technique he'd developed over 2 years of experience in the Gryffindor seating dynamics. He looked at Harry, read whatever was in his face, and said, sorted. Mostly, Harry said. Basilisk. Free. Diary. Destroyed last month. Right. Ron passed the bread. Ginny asked me to tell you she's doing better. Good. Harry took the bread. That's good. She also said the diary tried to tell her you'd eat her if she talked to you, which I told her was obviously, I'm glad she told me about it, Harry said. Yeah. Ron was quiet for a moment, in the comfortable silence of someone whose gratitude had no vocabulary adequate to it but whose presence communicated it anyway. He refilled his pumpkin juice. Percy's doing this whole thing about the chamber being solved before Dumbledore could officially address it, making it political somehow. I don't. Percy is performing competence anxiety, Hermione said, sitting down. He's head boy and the biggest crisis the school has seen in decades resolve itself without going through any official channel he has access to. That's threatening to a certain kind of ego. That's my brother, Ron said. I know. I said what I said. Harry ate his sandwich. Around them the great hall moved with its normal lunch noise, 800 people's conversation, the clatter of plates, the specific weather of a school operating at normal temperature after weeks of anxious cold. The petrified students would be unpetrified. Pomfrey had the mandrake restorative ready. The chamber was neutralized. The diary was gone. Somewhere out there, in places Harry had not yet identified, were pieces of a soul and objects, waiting. He thought about what he'd told Voldemort in June, the soul-splitting is why killing him once didn't work. He thought about Athena's map spread across the reading room floor. He thought about what the basilisk had said, the structural compulsion, the older thing, the Horcrux that had made the chamber responsive. A ring, maybe. A locket. Objects with weight and history, objects that would have mattered to a specific boy who grew up in an orphanage understanding that the only permanence was what you could seal something into. He thought about that, about a young Tom Riddle and what he had in common with that history of orphan logic, the understanding that what you were given could be taken back, that belonging was conditional, that the only things you could trust were the ones you'd made yourself. He understood it better than most people who'd ever tried to fight Tom Riddle, because he'd spent 11 years in a world outside of scarcity and still understood the instinct from the inside. He understood it from the inside, and he was still completely unlike Riddle, and the difference was not about power or heritage or intelligence. The difference was about what you did with the fear. Riddle had weaponized it, had made the fear of loss into an obsession with control, had made the instinct to hold on into a technology for never letting go. Harry had made it into something else, into the capacity to hold on and the capacity to release, to be moved by things without being swept away by them. This was Athena and Poseidon's work. He knew that. He gave them full credit for it without ceding the fact that it was also his. He ate his lunch and thought about what came next. Dumbledore's office was everything the rest of the school was and more, the portrait gallery of past headmasters, the silver instruments doing their small precise movements on various surfaces, Fawkes on his perch looking at Harry with the specific and attentive regard of a phoenix, which was a creature that understood cycles and therefore was never particularly alarmed by anything. Harry liked Fawkes immediately. He suspected the feeling was mutual. Dumbledore listened to everything Harry had to say, the basilisk, the compulsion, its removal, the structural Horcrux, the full picture as Harry currently held it. He listened with the specific quality of attention he'd been developing since June, which was the attention of a man who had understood that he was not the most informed person in this conversation and had decided to function accordingly. When Harry finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands on his desk. Then he said, the structural Horcrux. You believe it's an object? Something with a strong personal connection to Riddle, Harry said. Slytherin's bloodline made it most powerful, the diary was linked to Slytherin's lineage and the school, which is why it could activate the chamber. The structural one is older and deeper and I think predates the diary. Something from Slytherin himself, probably. He paused. I don't know where it is yet. But I will. How many do you think there are in total? 7. Harry said. 7 is the most magically powerful number and he would have known that and used it. 7 pieces. That means 6 Horcruxes and whatever remains in his current form. He looked at Dumbledore. We've destroyed 2. One last June, your instrument readings after the stone chamber should show the diary fragment dispersing when Voldemort's current form scattered, because they were the same piece, 1 this year. 4 more. Dumbledore looked at him over the half-moon spectacles with the full weight of his intelligence and experience applied to this problem and this person simultaneously. You've been building this picture all year. Since before school started, Harry said. Since Athena identified the soul division as the fundamental problem. A pause. She is, formidable. She is, Harry agreed. She's also been patient about your situation. She understands why you built the plan you built, even if she doesn't agree with it. He met Dumbledore's eyes. The plan where I go back to the Dursleys and grow up small and controlled and am delivered to a final confrontation not knowing half of what I am. That plan. Dumbledore's expression moved through something. Something honest. I was wrong, he said. Yes, Harry said. Not about everything. No. Not about everything. The sacrificial magic of love as a power structure, that's real and it matters and I carry it from my mother. The idea that Voldemort's defeat requires something personal in me, that's probably right. The timeline, the necessity, the fact that this particular war needs to end in this generation before it takes root in the next one. Harry paused. Those parts are right. The part where the way to ensure it was to keep me from knowing myself, that was wrong. I was afraid, Dumbledore said, very quietly. That if you knew your full power, you would use it incorrectly, Harry said. Become something you couldn't guide. Become something that solved the Voldemort problem and then became a different problem. Yes. I understand that fear, Harry said. I think the fear was honest. The decision it produced was wrong, but I don't think the fear was dishonest. He looked at Fawkes, who was watching this conversation with calm and attentive golden eyes. But for future reference, the way to ensure I use power correctly is not to hide the power from me. It's to teach me correctly. Which I was. Dumbledore looked at him, the full look, the one where the blue eyes were doing their most genuine work, not twinkling, not performing wisdom, just actually looking. Seeing. What do you need from me, he said. Harry felt the shift of it, that question, offered that way, as genuine as anything in this room. He thought about Athena's letter, more useful as an ally than an obstacle. He thought about what the next years were going to contain, Horcrux hunting, Voldemort's return, the war taking shape. Access, he said. To your records, your research, everything you've gathered on Riddle's history. The objects you suspect, the locations you've investigated. He paused. And honesty. About what you know and what you don't, including when you don't know something I ask you about. No managed information. No telling me what you think I need to hear. That's a significant ask, Dumbledore said. Yes, Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for exactly 5 seconds. All right, he said. And the basilisk stays in the chamber, Harry said. It's not a threat anymore. It's an ancient creature that has been living under compulsion for a millennium. It stays, and it's not hunted, and when we have occasion to address the chamber publicly I'd like that to be handled carefully. Dumbledore looked at him. You freed it from its compulsion. Yes. And then asked for its continued safety. Yes. You're not worried it'll, no, Harry said. It won't. He stood. Thank you, Professor. He left. In the corridor outside the gargoyle, he stopped and leaned against the stone wall for a moment, not from exhaustion but from the specific quiet aftermath of something significant having been concluded. Dumbledore was now an ally in the full sense, not an obstacle navigated, not an institution managed, but a genuinely intelligent person with significant resources pointed at the same problem. The Horcrux search had a starting point. Riddle's history, Dumbledore's research, what Athena had been building in the reading room all year. The rings and lockets and cups and diadems of dark history, each one carrying a piece of a divided soul, each one needing to be found and unmade. He wrote to Athena that evening, Basilisk freed and won't harm anyone. Chamber neutralized. Dumbledore is fully on board, real alliance, genuine information sharing. The structural Horcrux is older than the diary, predates the school I think, possibly an object from Slytherin's own possession that Riddle acquired. He was a collector. He'd want something with old power. He paused. I think there are objects connected to each founder. He'd want that symmetry. It's the kind of thing a boy from an orphanage who discovered he had a lineage would want, to possess the whole history, to own it. Then, also Poseidon was right about the squid. She communicated support for the basilisk situation. The deep water creatures are keeping track. He sent Theron out into the February dark and went to the common room. Ron and Hermione were at the table by the fire, Ron's chess set between them, Hermione losing with the particular expression of someone who understood the theory of chess completely and was being beaten by instinct, which she found philosophically frustrating. Ginny was in the armchair by the window with a book that was not a diary, a real book, her own, and she was reading it with the absorbed ease of someone who had rediscovered the pleasure of a page that didn't write back. Harry sat beside Ron, across from Hermione, and watched the fire. "So," Ron said, not looking up from the board. "What's next?" "Horcrux hunt," Harry said. "We need Riddle's history, everywhere he went, everyone he worked for, every object of significance he acquired between 1938 and 1981. That's the search space." "That's enormous," Hermione said. "That's why it'll take time," Harry said. "We've got years. We use them. Dumbledore's helping." "Dumbledore's helping." Hermione moved her bishop. Ron took it without looking. She sighed. "Do we think there's something connected to each founder?" "Probably," Harry said. He had a Slytherin connection in the diary. He'd want Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, Gryffindor. "Something of Gryffindor's," Ron said, and finally looked up from the board. "Here's a horrible thought. What if it's somewhere in the school?" "It's not in the school," Harry said. "How do you know?" "Because he'd want the Gryffindor object somewhere he had full control. Not in a school he associated with exclusion. He was a half-blood, the school was Dumbledore's territory. The school was for something he could control through a proxy, like the diary. The Gryffindor object, if there is one, will be somewhere personal." Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. "The sword," she said. "Gryffindor's sword." "Not the sword," Harry said. "Already accounted for, and Riddle wouldn't have had access. Something else." He thought about it, the thinking out loud process he did when the company was good enough for it. Gryffindor and Hufflepuff would be the difficult ones. Slytherin locket, he'd want the founding family's most personal object. Ravenclaw diadem. Hufflepuff cup. He looked at the fire. "I know where to start looking." "Do you?" Ron said. "The locket," Harry said. Regulus Black. He was a Death Eater who defected and died in 1979. Before he died he destroyed something of Voldemort's, or tried to. The Black family connection and the timing and the specific nature of the defection, the locket is at Grimmauld Place, Hermione said. She said it with the certainty of someone who had just synthesized several pieces of information at high speed. The Black family home. There was something in an old article I read about the estate, a locket that couldn't be destroyed, that kept getting set aside as rubbish, that no one could open, Harry said. "The heavy locket in the drawing room," Hermione said. "I read a description of the house. It's been mentioned in dark object inventories." She looked at Harry. "How did you, the full picture," Harry said. "I've been building the full picture all year." Ron looked between them with the expression he sometimes had when Harry and Hermione reached the same conclusion from different angles at the same speed, which was the expression of someone who found this impressive and slightly dizzying simultaneously. "So we just, go get it?" "Not yet," Harry said. "The house is sealed. We need to establish access." He paused. "But we know where it is. We know what we're looking for. We have Dumbledore as an actual ally instead of an obstacle." He looked at his two friends across the fire. "The war is going to escalate. Voldemort is going to come back properly, within the next 2 years, I think. When he does, he'll come back with a body and resources and the Death Eater network rebuilding. We need the Horcruxes gone before that." The fire crackled. Ginny turned a page. Ron's chess pieces waited on the board with the patient blankness of things that didn't need the situation to be comfortable. "Right," Ron said. "So we've got a plan." "We've got a direction," Harry said. "Plans are what you make when you know enough to plan. Right now we have a direction and good information and the right people." Hermione looked at him across the table. She had the expression she'd had in the library before first year, on the train, the recalibration expression, but 2 years developed now, familiar enough that it wasn't recalibration anymore but recognition. She'd had that expression on him so many times in 2 years that it had become its own kind of knowing, and he found he was glad of it, the specific glad that came from being known by someone you considered worth knowing. "The right people," she said. Yes, Harry said. Outside the Gryffindor Tower windows, the February dark was clear for once, the Scottish sky doing its occasional winter trick of absolute clarity, stars very bright over the forbidden forest and the lake. In the lake, the basilisk's weight had redistributed itself into a new configuration, freer than before, and somewhere in the dark water the giant squid moved in its long slow arc, patient and aware, and Theron was somewhere over the highlands heading for Athens with Harry's letter, and Athena was in her library with her maps, and Poseidon was in the sea, and the world was full of things that needed doing and the time to do them. Harry looked at the fire and thought about the next year, and the year after that. Thought about Voldemort's return, which was coming as surely as the tide, and about what he told him in the chamber under the school, "I'll be here." Thought about the Horcruxes in their scattered hiding places, each one a piece of a man who had asked the wrong question and spent 60 years making the error permanent. Thought about what it would mean to find them all, to unmake them, to strip away the architecture of immortality that had been built in error, until what remained was just Tom Riddle, human and mortal and facing the thing he'd spent his whole life running from. And then thought about what he'd offered, the other version. The conversation instead of the battle. The question asked correctly. He didn't know which one Voldemort was going to choose. He thought it was genuinely open, that the conversation in the stone chamber had genuinely moved something, that somewhere in the deep and fractured architecture of that divided soul there was a recognition he'd put there. He didn't know if it would survive the return, the rebuilding, the Death Eaters and the hunger for power and the 60 years of momentum. He thought it was worth finding out. He thought it was worth doing it right. He thought he had the time, the knowledge, and the people to do it right. The fire crackled. Ron moved his knight. Hermione said, "That's not fair," and Ron said, "It's completely fair, it's just the knight always does that," and Ginny looked up from her book and said, "He's right, Hermione, the knight always does that," and the common room was warm and full of noise and Harry sat in the middle of it, entirely himself, entirely unafraid, looking at a war he intended to win. Not because he had to. Because he chose to. Because the world was worth it and the people in it were worth it and he'd been raised by the goddess of wisdom and the god of the sea to understand the difference between what you were capable of and what you chose to do with it. He looked out the window at the stars, and the stars were the same stars they always were, the same stars he'd looked at in the arms of a god on a cliff above the Atlantic when he was 16 months old and didn't have words yet but knew recognition when he felt it. He felt it now.